This is going to be the first episode of the Best Damn League show for 2025. So obviously, LEC Winter has already begun. I'm not going to get into why we didn't have an episode before. Don't you worry about it. There's an episode now, and that's all that matters. And actually, I will say, I actually think this might, in theory, be the hardest year of LEC ever to even do like a pre-split power ranking. Like, for example, essentially, you can't even have an opinion on like Heretics and Vitality if you didn't watch like obscure ERL games that no one watched, unfortunately. So I actually think this, and if you saw it went with G2 and that, like, who even knows where this league's at? So we'll just start here. I think actually the obvious team to start with, normally I saved them on all the past seasons, you'll notice that. I've always saved G2 till the end because they were just always winning. It was the obvious team that at the end you just glaze and you just say what they're good at, who had a good week and who didn't. And it was more like, if anything, the weekly thing was sort of like, can anyone beat them? Or like, is there actually anything they're not good at? Like, now obviously we can have like a real convo about this team because they've done this big bold move where they've taken out the support jungle duo. By the way, that's no mean feat when one of them you're kicking out the doors, Mickey X, like one of like generational players. So you brought in Labrov, who admittedly, yes, had a wonderful year last year on BDS and was certainly a key player there. Was also very good in the first split, so people remember. But you've also brought in this SkewMond guy who, if people don't know, is sort of hyped like Kalista's ADC, but at jungle. He was the guy from BDS Academy. Everyone was apparently slavering over all the scrims last year, and it was just guaranteed he was going to end up on some big name team, right? Obviously, they started 1 and 2 Nymaera, and actually one of their games was mega fucking sus. So where are you at initially on G2? Where are we starting with this thing?
Well, I mean, as you said, changing jungle support is kind of that's kind of the no-no for big teams. Jungle support is the thing I would want to keep if I want to keep a style with a team, a macro and early game with a team. So that was always going to be very difficult. And just backtracking to something you just said in terms of like keeping track of players through random ERLs. This is just a quick tangent because I find this really funny. So there are a bunch of players in LEC from ERLs, which I cast a couple of years ago, and this has got its own unique problem because I now remember these players from like 2022.
All right.
Or in the case of SkewMond, I cast this guy in one of his first competitive ever splits in one of my first ever paid casting gigs on UK LC, which was the tier below NLC.
How long ago was this?
This was 2021. So this was like, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to put things into perspective because, like, obviously I've not been around as long as some casters, but this was, like, still quite a long time ago for that. And by the way, he still was a newly one trick even back then.
All right.
He was, like, on Enclave, if I remember, a team which is now defunct, which was, like, mid-tier UKLC, and this guy was, like, decent as a player, but I have, like, some vague memories of that. I heard some good stuff about him when he was in different ERLs to the ones which I was covering, and now suddenly he's in the fucking LEC on G2 as the most hyped jungler. So for me, I actually have a unique problem for that of remembering them before they kind of went through their development arc, and now I'm seeing them with a couple of years out there. So I've kind of got a load of pieces I've got to put together for them. Like I did cover a bit of Emir Masters just because I try and keep up with the LEC players, but the consensus on this guy was that he was massive team player, played through lanes, very vocal, very energetic and great for a team atmosphere, and G2 very much wanted him, but a lot of teams wanted him because he was on the EMEA Masters winning team. Was he BDS Academy?
Yep.
Yeah, so this guy was like super hyped. But at the end of the day, changing jungle support is not an easy thing. In LPL, in fact, the super teams which have succeeded are the ones which kept their jungle support together, typically. You know, the JDG super team kept their jungle support together, and they brought in Knight, and they brought in Ruler, and whatever. Those bits are more plug and play. Plugging in a jungler is very difficult, so it doesn't surprise me that there are teething issues for G2. Now there has to be a point, though, where any view about G2 has to be in the scope of these are still best of ones just after a team has formed.
Sure, and it's Fearless Draft. You throw that in as well, you know.
Well, Fearless Draft will come later, but for best ones, I'm just like, who gives a damn for that for now.
Oh, true, yeah, obviously, that doesn't apply yet, of course. Yes.
So that doesn't apply yet. But the big thing is also that if you're trying to then kind of float on just mechanics from laning phase of your 3 kind of remaining members and also their instincts do not apply for this goddamn new objective Atakan, which is in a completely different way. Because I think we're...
which is going to change macro forever, right? It's not just some side... I don't think people realise this is even more impactful than the Grobs, potentially.
Hugely so, and the way you fight about it is completely different to anything else that's fought about in League. So as we're coming up to this like next LEC weekend, it's a big topic which I want to bring onto the broadcast there as well, which is you are not fighting in a pit for once. You're not fighting in a dragon pit. You're not fighting in a baron pit. And like imagine if you're an attack shooter and suddenly just the site is just like completely open with like something like that. You don't have to. You're not playing suddenly around. These defensive walls which can either pin you into it or you can fire over them if you're very long range or artillery or something like that. It's completely different. And I think that really played into their loss against BDS, where they went to Atakan with a huge early game gold lead. And for some reason, they're just brains turned off. I don't know whether it's just because their instincts are off. They pile into the tri-brush or try to because they're looking for an engage onto the Varus, I assume, and they get just absolutely destroyed by a shockwave. They lose Atakan and they lose the game. So instincts there are in place yet. You're still in week 1 with best of ones, and you've replaced the macro and early game powerhouse of your team. So as what I would love to make the clickbaity, crazy takes about G2, but realistically we haven't seen enough about them. And also Dylan Falco just put out an interview as well. I think it was with Sheepy.
Yep, it was.
Just saying that, well, we're still feeling okay. And from what I've also heard from internal team as well, they're still happy with the changes that they made to the roster. That seems to be the prevailing opinion. So I'm willing to give them another week or two and just say, well, make it to playoffs and show us what you can do in Fearless Draft. So that's kind of like the overarching stuff. I suppose on individual players, Caps is still Caps. That's a good thing and shows that if you give him the most powerful champions in the patch on something like Victor, it goes away with a pentakill. So yeah, I mean, the warning sirens aren't there for me on G2 just yet. If it's another week and things look really bad and they don't make playoffs because they've dropped too many games, then obviously, yes, that's awful for a team that won the Grand Slam of LEC titles last year. But there's a lot of extenuating circumstances for the team.
I don't think, actually, since they kept the 3 carries, that they can actually be bad Nymaera. Like, to me, even if, like, even if the jungle mid doesn't work or it's not the perfect in the split ward or the shot calling issues, like, obviously an issue they could have gambled on here is maybe they've given up some of the macro angles, who knows? Like, even if that's the case, they just have too many good players and Caps, as you say. So, to me, at a minimum, they have to at least be, obviously, a playoff team and probably, like, at minimum a dark horse for the league, if not just a true contender. Like, it's not like the other teams have been that insane, but I will say
it's already weird that they're not the favourites because we know them to be G2, but they should still be in the upper echelons.
Yeah, sure. Put it this way, bear in mind the only team that 3-0 is GiantX. Like, shut the fuck up, anyone telling me they're number 1. Again, on a power ranking, yeah, they'd have to be number 1, but that is not the same as who, if I put a gun to your head and said bet all your life savings now, you'd probably revert to G2 and assume Ansama and Caps do some shit, wouldn't you? So, but here's the problem. I actually do think people have undervalued what a tough spot G2 was in Nymaera, because since as that campaign that they did in Berlin or whatever with all those posts, like no one's perfect because they lost one split in like 2 years, right? In theory, the logic should go, run it back a 3rd year. But actually, if anything, that's only something that makes sense appealing-wise after the 1st year, because most teams do only have the 5-man light for the 1 year. So after the 1st year, it's true. You look at that and you go, hey, you know what? In spring coming in MSI, we were like pretty fucking sick, actually. We sort of leading the meta in the world, even maybe. Hey, maybe we run it back again and we work on some other things and we build some things out. That wouldn't have been the case the 3rd time around. If anything, by the way, it was diminishing returns last year. They were actually, even though they won all the LECs, they were worse. I mean, the joke was, at the end of that year, no one said, wow, G2 was dope. They were like, everyone except G2 was absolute shit.
Like, something's gotta change.
Yeah, everyone just flamed the whole league. It's why the whole league had like this like Rome is fucking falling vibe around LEC.
Yeah, there is, and for, we've watched a lot of League at this point. My first split really watching was 2014, but I've been back since that at like 2013. I've gone back and I've done my history and I've done my checks on that. Back then, it was a miracle to see teams stick together for more than like 1 year. Like, the fact that we've got teams maybe even sticking together for 3 when they're top of the league, that it just did not happen back then. Like, getting 2 years out of and getting 2 good years out of a roster like that is already pretty good. And I completely understand why it's changed for the sake of change. There is a bit of a funny kind of parallel between Yike and SkewMond, though. I use the Simpsons scene as an allegory for it, because it just feels like they have a scene for everything. There's one bit where there's Holmes choosing between a prize between you can have a yacht or you can have what's in the box.
Oh, it's Monty's favorite example. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you can have Yike, or you can have this ERL jungler, which might end up being Yike and SkewMond. There was a little bit of that in the back of my head, where like you're just taking another gamble on a kind of a like for like upgrade from ERL, you know, the most hyped ERL jungler, and putting them up into pro play. I am hoping that he can fix some of their kind of because it seemed to be that Yike wasn't the most talkative person in game on G2. I think it's quite hard to do that on G2 because they've got so many big names which determine the game. But yeah, that was always going to be a little bit of a roll of the dice. I hope that SkewMond kind of gets his stuff together. There was that one bit after the BDS game where he came out again and his head was in his hands and he looked like he was mentally a bit done. So I hope that's not going to be too severe, because if mentally he's already kind of struggling with that, it's not going to get easy if they lose another game, especially to like a mid-table team.
They also obviously had the problem, like the double problem, that even though, yes, they were winning all the LECs, they didn't actually do anything internationally. People forget this. Okay, yes, they beat Top Esports.
This is SKT, which they couldn't close.
They beat Top Esports when Top Esports played their absolute worst of the entire year. And then they had that thing which Team Liquid lived off last year of like, we almost beat someone. It's like, unfortunately, almost doesn't actually go in a trophy cabinet, guys. As my friend Moses from CS from America said, almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. You think about that idiom. It's actually a banger if you think about it, quite literally. So one of the things is, obviously, as you say, you had to change something. And if you look at the squad, look, I am a dedicated, I'll joke here, I'm a dedicated Broken Blade hater. Maybe I would have said maybe you gamble on irrelevant for Brook, you know, one of those moves. But assuming you look at it, and let's be real, he was still one of the best top laners the whole time. He had times when he was actually the person even in the draft who was cycling through stuff.
And if you want to do stuff internationally, his international games.
He's also leveled up a lot over the years. And then you look, nobody can cut Hans Sammer and Caps. I'm sorry, guys. At that point in time, even if you were me and you think Upset's better than Hans Sammer, it's like, it's a fucking sideways at best, and you haven't worked with him, so how do you know it would work? So to me, the ones you would obviously change is, look, Mickey X hinted the most, so that one just seems easy, and I'll just infer this myself, I can't know, but I'm going to guess it's possible Hans Sammer also just decided, I'd like to try, like Labravo, I'd like to move on to another person. He obviously played all those years with Mickey, it's not like they hadn't had enough experience. And then the jungle angle, I always thought Yike was actually at the end slightly hard done by, because he actually was generally never ever bad in this team. He was always good. He had splits where he was very good. He even actually played pretty well at Worlds in some of the games. It's just his problem was, and this really is the issue, everyone did the modelling, the characterisation when he came into G2 of like, it's this up-and-coming young... He wasn't. He was already like 23 years old, if you don't know, guys, and he played for a million years.
He was like an absolute stud in the era.
And by the way, he was good,
clearly LEC,
but the problem is, if you look at all these players... The odds that he gets like 20% better now, it's just not really going to happen, is it? You're sort of a known quantity. So in this scenario, you have gambled, but you are, hey, I'll tell you what, if you're going to gamble, swing for the fences. If someone tells you this is some generational jungle time, then you actually hope he is the next Yanko. So you just say, fuck it. We already did the Ike thing. Look, remember, they did have a lot of international tournaments as well. People forget that. They had plenty of chances. And as we're saying, the best they got was like, you know, moral victories and stuff. And they needed real victories. They needed real top 8s. And to beat T1 even one time, by the way, would have been so big. So I can't blame them. In that scenario, it's not like that lineup could complain and go, hey, getting another chance. As we said, they already had more chances than anyone. So in that sense, I'm cool with it. It might not work out yet. I'm a little skeptical myself. I'm just not somebody who's that big a believer in rookies always. But I can see why they roll the dice. Yeah, I don't hate it. And I'm with you, by the way. This isn't when you... If anything, by the way, if you know anything about narratives, guys, this is when you let all the plebs flee and go, oh my God, this guy's better. And then you just go, I think I'll double down and they'll be in the final still, damn it. And then we just all look smart in like however many weeks from now it is. Sure.
They still have just ridiculous stock value as players. I mean, yeah.
And all the coaching staff, they've all got most of the things that we thought were excellent. Yeah.
I did find I absolutely know he's fishing for like a clip on this, but Gilhoto had an interview.
Listen, he thinks he's on my other show, mate. Hot Take Point made League of Legends. That would be a bagger take on there. Yeah, it's a pretty mental take, though.
They're not going to make. Yes, G2 aren't going to make Worlds after 3 rounds. Now the thing is, though, if you view that from the perspective of, and I think everyone is vaguely on this train. The LEC is better than last year. Okay. The top teams look like they're better than last year. Which, to be honest, when everyone was flaming the LEC last year and all the teams, it's not that hot point.
No.
Make, really. I mean, if you think that there are... Wait, how many teams do we get at Worlds now? It's 3, I presume.
I believe it's 3, because in theory, we'd have to have someone like come to the final of like MSI or something ridiculous, so it's not going to happen, probably.
I don't think it's unreasonable to say there are 3 teams that could beat G2. I think there are 3 good teams. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of noise in there, and we'll have.
I mean, I'll put it this way: even to be generous, you could immediately say it's plausible from the rosters that like Movistar and Fnatic could do it. Then just pick one more. Who knows? Maybe BDS. I actually thought they were pretty good this week. Maybe they can get it together. Whoever, like, you know, the team that you don't expect but gets the shit together. By the way, Karmine Corp. I'm not really a big fan myself, but again, got some pretty good play. Yeah, basically, what you're sort of saying here is it's not like they have to be terrible to not make the top 3. If there's only 3 go, you could be a decent fourth.
G2 not making worlds last year would have been
Yes.
crimes against all that is good and holy within League of Legends. If they don't make it this year, it's like, actually, I think I can at least see that being teams of a caliber to take them down in important ways. So maybe not the hottest point, I suppose, given that context.
And by the way, for people who don't remember, because one thing that was a nightmare last year is, bro, people kept doing talk shows during the LEC season finals going, so how many points do they cover? It's just a pure bracket. It's just please. But here's the thing, Nymaera. I actually think we got lucky because remember, G2 got dropped down to low bracket, but luckily they were playing BDS, who were basically their fucking pickup tonic all year long. But I always thought to myself, bro, I'll tell you what, if G2 had somehow lost to BDS and not gone to Worlds, I'm telling you right now, this format would have been changed because it would have been mental to have a team win everything and then just blow it at the very end. Like, even though that, in theory that's fair, that's allowed, that would, I don't think we'd have the same format.
That would have been like the biggest. I'm trying to think the biggest miss of Worlds before that. That would have rivaled KTR's 2014 winning OGN Summer and then not making Worlds. That it's just up there with
or maybe the Longzhu that had Khan on it. That was when they bombed it after they won the spring one. There's a couple that have done it, but it's very rare, obviously. Of course. Yes. Right. Okay. Here's the thing. Even though I said all that about G2, we're not going to go crazy in depth on it. Like I say, I actually think there's not too much to go on.
Plenty of good teams to talk about, actually.
Tell you what, pick one. What's a top team for now? Let's get a big one in here. Who you want to go to?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether I'm confident calling them a top team, but we may as well talk about GX because they're 3-0. I think that, and I'm sure a lot of people will be surprised at it. So why are people surprised, and what did they actually achieve this week? So they went 3-0, and this is a group of 5 players that have, to my knowledge, never played together before. And considering that it is best of ones, but you're coming into I suppose not a crazy different meta, but with the after Khan, it's worth changing that. I think I've actually had a decent head start. And given that GX last year had a worst roster on paper and still built a pretty fun identity around like triple tank engage when they had the Ornn and Mumu plus whatever was in support, I can see the beginnings of something here. Now, I'm not going to say this is a top team finals contender or something because, I mean, they played against SK, who look very bad.
They're the worst team right now, yeah.
They had a 60-minute game versus Rogue.
No, by the way, the joke there is no one won on that one. We all lost.
And the players believe that too.
Fair enough. Okay.
We had Closer in PGL at the end of the weekend. He was like, we just did not feel happy about winning that game. Other teams would feel happy about winning. We wanted to win like we were doing in scrims.
The last game was the good one, though. The KC one was legit, right?
And they actually put them to the sword when KC they'd beaten KOI, who looked actually pretty good in their opening games too, especially with Jojopian. They're a very hyped roster. So there's a lot of noise in this, but the way that they were winning, and also some of the stuff that's being said behind the scenes, because the LEC broadcast reached out to a lot of the players and got anonymous scrim opinions effectively from them, which was pretty cool. So we've had a couple of them on broadcast in terms of where are the scrim bucks? Nameplates are off. Tell us what you think. GiantX are the team which came up the most often as a dark horse. People are saying Fnatic blasting through scrims, they might be the best team in the league. But actually, GiantX, they are the dark horse. They look really good, and their mid laner Jackies looks awesome as well. So yeah, I think it's worth kind of at least discussing this team early, while it seems like they've gotten an early head start in terms of cohesion. We were talking about changing a jungle support very, very hard. Well, you've got Closer and Jun who've never played together, and they looked really good, actually. I think Jun on an individual level was very, very good, partly because he was, dodging one of his weaker champions in Leona, which was never really his champion. They didn't pick it for him. He looked a lot better, more comfortable on other stuff. And the whole team was focusing, following up very, very well at that. I think another thing to add into this too is that I think GX not having a spotlight on them and being very underdog, not really being a team with many achievements for, really turns the pressure off, which means that Noah looked so much more comfortable. He had like a couple of Kaiser ults into an Azir ult in the 60-minute game, which were not fantastic. But besides that, I think Noah is in with a shout for best AD carry of week 1. He had some really good jump forwards on the Ezreal. I think actually AD carry was a very stat role, so I'm not married to that idea. But yeah, I think GiantX, they did surprise me, but I'm now looking at them quite seriously and saying, okay, right, you grew beyond your player roster in last year. What can you do with better players now?
Yeah, I'll also say as well, like, understandably, I'm not super knowledgeable about the player lot, but it's even an interesting angle, actually.
Me neither, actually. I'm learning a lot about him now.
Whether through happenstance or actually design, it is quite interesting that they've put a top and jungle who are Turkish. If people don't know, at the beginning of League of Legends, Jungle basically get top all the time. That's a classic matchup anyway, because the longest lane, isn't it? And then the bot lane is just the Fnatic all-Korean bot lane from last year. So in some way, and then you've just kept Jackie's, who, by the way, was the most obvious prospect to come into the LEC last year. He just looked really good, right? I mean, I actually thought he was all right at the beginning, and then he just got better every split, like the dream of, the rookie that goes one step up each split. And by the way, actually, he looks like he's going to do it again. He looks like he's ready now. My take on some of the insight was, if this team somehow did fuck around and be top 2 team, he's going to be the MVP candidate. He's built for it, mate. It even seems like he embraces that kind of style of play.
Especially with, so obviously I'm still very much keeping up with LPL, and it really helps me kind of juxtapose the meta, because one of the things which is really frustrating me about week 1 LEC drafts is that teams are picking very defensively because they're not confident or able to play the aggressive compositions. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why G2 looked a bit worse, is that they were playing the aggressive heavy melee comps, which are very popular in LPL, when you pick Yone or Silas, Ambessa, Sejuani, and just kind of full dive the one carry in the backline, and you just try and delete the AD carry, run over the fight from that. Obviously, G2 couldn't pull that off, but I think Jackie's being one of the best Yone players in the league made... Yeah, 1RV was very good on it last year. He might even be contender for best on that. And having a more active mid lane champion pool than just Corki or Azir or Victor or something like that, that's really helping this team play the aggressive side of things. They showed 3 quite different compositions in week 1, and the aggressive comp they played against KC was pretty impactful on that. So that's something which I'm really happy with too. If they can actually play the aggressive side of things when everyone's overactively going into defensive stuff, that's going to really help them for Fearless, because let me tell you, you cannot pick every disengaged composition in a best of 5 Fearless. We've seen that run out. You only have so many Ezreals. So yeah, that's a good start for me. I'm going to assume they're going to make playoffs. They've got 3 out of the wins. I think you need to get 5 wins to lock playoffs.
Right.
Next week for them is going to be pretty hard, because they're against KOI and G2. They're against Heretics as well, who are one of our worst teams in the league. But G2, that'll be a real kind of that'll be a good forge in fire thing. Yeah, as long as they have a good showing. I don't even care if they win. As long as they have a good showing, I'm happy to say this team will build, especially since it's very early into the year.
I'm also a Giotto fan, I've got to say. I actually think he's legit. He's one of the people where... Here's the thing. There are definitely people who are good talkers, but I'll say this. They're good talkers on just a mic where no one's really putting their feet to the fire. And whenever I talk to people on shows or privately, I get a sense of, are they trying to sell me some bullshit, or do they really believe that? Giotto's one of those people where, mixed between my interviews and then knowing players that have played under him, I don't know anyone who says a bad word about this guy. Everyone thinks he's underrated. Actually, as he showed in the interview, the craziest thing I found out in my Reflections interview, bro, is this guy turned down Fnatic twice. He could have been on Fnatic. Yeah, he could have been. Apparently, he could have been on one of the Fnatics that had caps on or something. His problem was he didn't want to do that thing in the off season where you gamble, and then if you don't get the gig, you miss out on the musical chairs, as it were. So believe it or not, there's times where he's picked lesser squads. It's basically only Team Liquid wherever he went for the super names, and actually even then, by the way, there's an asterisk, which is when you know this, you don't blame him as much. Apparently, in the first split on Team Liquid, they just didn't like the way the games were going, and because it was his job to tank the aggro from fans, they actually took draft away from him as a coach, which I think is insane, because at the end of the year, you will be judged as if you did all the drafts, won't you? So all I'm saying is, I actually think if people go, why isn't he get a championship? There's reasons, mate. It doesn't mean you're bad. This is the equivalent. This is the equivalent of being the manager of Aston Villa, mate. It's not about winning the fucking Premier League, is it? It's if you can get top 4, you probably goated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this guy's playing career mode on FIFA.
Yeah, exactly.
Taking this tiny Hibernian or something up into Champions League. I on that separate note, I think there's going to be. This is definitely a topic to return to when it gets towards Fearless. Drafting in the West is already. There's a. You
had a comment I wanted to ask about this actually. You said, because obviously you've been watching the LPL as well. You said that they were so far. Kalista had been 0-3 when it was picked in the LEC, but obviously it's fucking insane if you watch it in the major. So what's the problem? Because when I looked this up as well, just to check, bro, it can't be the players, because 2 of them were fucking Ansama and Super, who 2 of our best LEC. Sure, Patrick's a bit of an empty chair, but those 2 are fucking some of our best players. Why is it not working for the Western teams, do you think?
That is so. Yeah, before I think there was 1 loss in the LPL today as of recording, or maybe yesterday. But up until that point, it was 6-0 between LCK and LPL, so 100% win rate, and then 0-3 in LEC. So and yet it'd been banned 14 times or something, or not 14, 12 or something like that. So 100% presence.
Which implies in scrims everyone's playing it, right?
Yeah, and so there were a couple of interviews about it over the weekend. Upset answered a question about it, saying that, well, it's about the objective gameplay. The objectives are very different right now. We already talked about Atakan and the instincts changing around. that objective, hell, in fact, was it? Yeah, in Super's game, they've played against an Atacon, and he stacked up all of the spears on the objective, and then he had to flash out because there's a rumble equalizer. The spears ran out, and he had to kind of like go back in to try and secure it. He got like a kill, and he was super fed, but he didn't manage to get the objective. So obviously not the objective fight that you want. So I think there is an element of saying the objective fights are not good enough to make most of Kalista's kind of objective secure, and also her being an engage ADC weirdly too, because you just throw your support in like a Pokeball and to see what happens. I will say though, I don't like the laning phase in Europe right now from almost any bot lane. The game, which obviously taking the extreme of it, look at the Rogue game where they had Patrick on Kalista and then you had Adam on Olaf, and I'm thinking, okay, if I see that in draft, I want to lane swap away from it. I think it was against BDS. BDS just chose standard lanes, didn't really fall behind in early game, even against a Kalista and an Olaf, and they just won because their team comp was better in front to back. If Rogue can't play through laning phases like that, they shouldn't be picking it. And then you look at the other games too. You had a really good set of kills onto Super's Kalista, but then Caliste, very confusing, on the Varus was super good on the poke Varus, just kind of nullifying that. I really think that the overall picture for me is that we're not getting enough out of really sharp laning phases. I think that even last year, the only team I trusted with kill lanes was G2 when they were playing like the Draven Kalista last year. They were the only team that were actually playing kill lanes. And I think that's the case now where LEC teams don't really know how to take a good wave state, call the jungle down at the right point, completely crush lane, make the game unplayable at that point. If you look at LCK LPL, if you make a bad enough laning mistake in bot lane, the game can literally just end off of that because your resets are messed up. You get second reset to Grubs because they get to push you in, reset first, go to Grubs, they take that, and that kind of flows across the map beyond that point. So I think that map play towards winning lanes and then objective fights is making it much harder to get the most out of Kalista. And I really hope that changes, because if suddenly we can't play a 100% presence champion or near enough that globally, well, that really does not bode well for us in any sort of international competition coming up. That's going to be a huge issue.
Since you bring up Rogue, that's actually a thing we didn't talk about on some of the insight for obvious reasons. I wanted to have a fun conversation. So here's how I'll start out Nymaera, right? If there was ever a first game that meant nothing at all, it was this one, because what we didn't know was Heretics actually, look, shout out SK, you're 0-3, but Heretics is going to be challenging you, mate, for the bottom of the fucking league. Like, that squad looks pretty ropey. So even though Rogue beat them, obviously, look, you can argue they had a chance to win the mega fucking 1 hour game too. In theory, anyone could have won that, even though we all lost, as the joke goes. But the problem is, they just don't look like an actually good team, Nymaera, because there's two problems you have in this. One, in the most simplistic, reductive manner, yes, in theory, it makes sense that if you put maniacs with really passive players, maybe they sort of bring the best out of each other. This is an example of how they can all do those same things and just have no synergy. Like my boy Larson, by the way, I don't think so.
No, you just have half the team doing one thing.
Best example is my boy Larson. My boy Larson's still, by the way, mechanically, clearly a very good player. His problem is he's never going to be fucking Jackies or Caps. He's obviously a more conservative laner. So the issue is, at the moment, mate, synergy doesn't even exist in this team. I want to know what your take is on it, because it's such a wild mix of players.
Yeah, I mean, obviously each game is kind of its own little world, where games 1 and 3 were quite inactive. I think game 3 was draft diff. You cannot play front to back with that comp. Well, okay, it's part draft diff, and then also if you're going to play that draft, you need to play laning phase well, and as we covered before that, nope, they didn't do that well. So you're not getting a good enough lead out of the Kalista, which will just end the game through the early game, which is why it's picked so often elsewhere. By the way, one of the reasons why it has been picked more is, I can't remember the exact change to it. Kalista used to get mega screwed by getting slowed, which is why Ashe 0 prio in Europe, by the way, that's just another thing. Ashe would just hard counter them, you get a slow, and suddenly Kalista's attack speed drops to the floor, because slow also slows her attack speed, because every time she would normally attack, she moves as well. So it's like the way of them saying, well, okay, she'll move less, so that's the way that a slow affects her. So that's less potent now, which means that Kalista is much less hard countered in lane, which means you can play out a lot of different games and drafts a lot easier. So yeah, the fact that you can't play through something like the Kalista in the early laning phase, even with the changes to that, big problem. And then they got themselves to a point where, okay, you haven't won the early game, and now you just can't play the team fights either, because you're completely outranged, and you're playing into, I can't remember the exact comp that game, which Larson had, but Larson's played like 3 long-range mages, so it's one of them. And you just can't reach those carries. So the way that LPL deals with that is they pick stuff like, Akali, Ambessa, Silas, or Rumble obviously just drops the ult down the entire team fight.
Oh, was this the Cassiopeia game? This is the BDS game, yeah?
Yes,
It was when because you own Cassiopeia, basically, you could never come into the fight, could he? Just could never enter the fight, basically.
Yeah, and that was like the lowest range pick he'd played for some reason in the game where he really needed extra range.
Of all the times not to play as Azir or something, mate.
Exactly. So that one just felt like oops, draft my bad.
Okay.
That one I feel a little bit less bad about the team fights, although the other game I've already highlighted that. The second game though, I actually think Larson played that game pretty damn well. If you look at every fight, it was Jun just trying to like rel flash engage onto whoever he could and try and reach both carries. And Larson was splitting away from his AD carry and just saying, okay, I will just make sure that only one of us gets caught out, worst case scenario. I'll ult the rel away if it comes to it, and then I'll clean up the fight. So he wasn't going for the aggressive shuffles. He was looking for the long range because the other team didn't have that engage. LEC isn't picking the Akalis and the stuff which will always reach the backline, even if they die in the process of it, but they'll always get there. And he actually cleaned up a lot of those fights. Obviously, there were a lot of thrown fights too. They had the Atakan, threw it in front of Baron, leashed Baron, and the game got very, very interesting after that point. Very sadly for them. But yeah, I think Larson on like an individual level, and I don't take much umbrage with. Adam, he's walking up and dying quite a lot, which is not great. I think it's just a team which is quite disconnected. And obviously, it's quite easy to say that between the playstyles of the players, but just when they're angling for fights, it feels like, oh, Adam's here and he can get picked off, but the damage isn't in range to kind of support him if he does go into a fight. So Rogue have a lot of like spacing issues to work with. If someone's looking and actually trying to look for a fight, you must have someone in your back pocket able to support you, and I don't think they were doing that particularly well. Handful of draft issues, laning issues weren't, don't pick the early game stompy comps, pick something that can actually go late and scale. And hopefully, look, I will still say, Rogue are better than last year.
True.
That's something for them. They're better than
that
last
isn't
year.
Too much to say though, but at the same time, sure.
But given that people would just actively turn off the stream when they were playing,
sure.
and now actually game 2, people are like, at least there's a morbid curiosity in terms of like, this is still going. That at least was fine, and I'm hoping that Malorang and Execute can kind of like lock into the early game a bit more, because I suppose like Malorang isn't inting in the early game anymore. It's just that he's less proactive in general.
It's also in theory underrated that they are both Korean. Like, look, I doubt they're going to do it much, but they could in theory speak to each other in Korean and separately and get on the same page and all that jazz. Because I did always think Malorang was a player that looked like he just did whatever people tell him to do with the game. It doesn't look like he makes his own decision all the time.
Yeah, the thing with Malorang when he was last in the LEC is that he had a set of laners who he knew if they get to team fights, they will outvalue most other solo laners in the LEC. Like, Larson will get on a mage, we'll get 2 items, cool. Team fights are sorted. And the same with, was that when they had Hans Sama?
No, that was when they had, what's his name, fucking... my
he was
brain.
there.
I'm tired.
Yeah, look, this is the thing.
Who's Comp?
Comp, that's the one. It was
dead now, sadly.
Before that. Like, it's trying to think through many years of Rogue games. But like Comp and Larson were just very happy to sit in lane. Odo as well, just very happy to sit in lane, hit 2 items, and suddenly they were very good at team fighting. So Malorang's job was just be as weird a smokescreen as possible, be a one-man army. Doesn't matter what happens, just make sure that no one messes with your lanes. Just no one turns up into them. Just let them individually lane, and that'll be fine. The meta's moved on a lot since then, like a lot, because we had 23 and 24 where we had, different Herald metas where you must fight for the Herald and then you'll just slam into mid lane turret and then suddenly you can't defend mid lane turret anymore. We've had Grubs where suddenly if you give 6 Scrubs over and you don't fight for them, game kind of just ends through side lanes or whatever else you give up at that point. You're not able to really just let lanes not interact for a while now. Lanes must rotate, they must fight for early objectives in a way which wasn't as game ending before. So that's definitely changed like the Rogue formula. It doesn't surprise me that Rogue haven't just been able to go back to that style. And it doesn't surprise me that Malorang's had to adjust a little bit too, because he's not just allowed to int anymore. He actually has to turn up to certain timers at the same place. But it is a little sad because I would have hoped it would have given at least Adam some kind of way to get ahead early and kind of be obnoxious 1v3 champions in side lanes, because that does a lot for a team, because then suddenly he can be your smoke screen. He's not a jungler. He doesn't have to be someone to press a smite. So yeah, Rogue have a lot of soul searching to do, I think.
My main concern with that team, aside from the fact that they just look like a mess, is actually Adam. It's the obvious player to me because, first of all, I don't think people realise the best of Adam the entire time basically in the LEC, because I didn't think he was very good on that Fnatic. I think he was obviously the player that sort of like band-aided and just gave him very simple tasks. And if you remember, like, but that's the reason why everyone raved him up. We're poor. It wasn't that he was really like the best jungler in the world, guys. That had somehow made it work with like fucking Lucky Adam just like in and half the game. So if you look at when he was at his best, it was when he had Striker from BDS as his coach, who I can tell you is one of the only... Here's all you need to know about Striker Nymaera. This guy's so gangster, he did say, get Reckless to fuck out my team or I leave. And then he just left because they wouldn't do it. Like, let me know how many people... I know some all-time great coaches, mate, with LEC trophies who couldn't do that or tried and then they had to go, all right, I guess I'll play with him. So he's one of the only real disciplinarians. I mean, I even said, look, it ended up being not a great move, but he's also the only coach who would ever bench someone like that. Because if you don't...
benched Adam for that playoff split.
And remember, that was when Adam was probably his best split ever. That was when the team actually really had a chance to win a split, and he benched him. Here's the problem. Freddy122 is not that guy. Freddy122 is the nerd guy who's like, here's the X's and O's, and guys, let's do our practice and get our reps in. Let's play the game. Here's some macro idea. He's not the guy who's going to like fucking take this guy to task. So first of all, I'm just worried about some sort of a flare-up if they indeed are a bottom half team. And then the other thing is the Malrang angle. It's like, bro, as you said, when you play before, if I play with Odoamne, Comp and Larson, I could pretty much just the jungler have a pretty good idea what my pathing's going to be, when I'm going to come and gag, what they're going to do. They're not going to be going for crazy 1v1s. I have to cover like some cap shit. Like, the difference is Adam is a maniac who himself clearly doesn't always know in the moment like what I'm about to do next. And if you're Malrang, I have to say, if I have Adam as well as a coach, I also maybe want a jungler that'll hold his hand a bit, you know, or collaborate. Maybe like a Yike or something would have been good to work with him, or if he was in the league, Yankos or someone. These are the people I feel like, just like Whippo and Fnatic, I feel like these people could get to him. I don't know that Malrang's the mix, mate, especially because I'll give you the obvious angle. This could actually, because I do think one of Adam's few flaws is, in some of the macro concepts, he actually just never has got there. He's had years now, mate. He's just never going to get that concept that all the great top laners have of like, when it's like too much to play up in the lane, when you have to... Here's one thing he'll never do now, mate. He'll never just like give up a death to reset the lane or something. Like, he's the guy who always thinks you can win like it's solo queue, and my concern is Malrang is the only jungler that is like every solo queue player's dream. It's like, come top, okay sir, pathing there, I'll cancel this item and get the ruby crystal and come there. Like, if that happens too much, that better not be a real factor where you can just call him top links. It's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, because the thing with Adam is like, I did somewhat respect him for saying, okay, most teams in Europe, and himself as the top laner included, don't really know how to play side lanes that well, especially when you compare it to global league.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I'm gonna forge a champion pool to say I don't need to really know the intricacies of playing side lanes. If I play Garen, Olaf, Darius, stuff like Alawi is kind of in that champion pool too. I don't know if he's ever played a pro. I don't think he has played a pro game of it. Like, you don't 1v1 those champions. Like, if you play a 1v1, you lose that 1v1, the game actually becomes very, very difficult. They don't exactly have the best 5v5 value, but you never want to send like one person at them, so you have to send 2 or 3 people instead every time they're on a side lane. So even if you're not necessarily moving always at the right times, you're not necessarily having the best kind of management over side wave timing, stuff like that, you're always calling someone else to your lane. So it kind of creates kind of like an artificial side laning style where like you don't know the intricacies, but you're such a like a pressure valve that it can kind of work anyway. So I kind of respected that, but that also really hinged around him being very, very good at knowing his damage limitations and threatening a 1v1, so people must then respond to it. Because basically half of his time when he was playing those kind of champions, you know, the gods champions or whatever, was him just walking down a lane, seeing 2 people and then backing off and then just doing that on repeat. And that was fine. That was fine. You know what? Credit to it. I'm not a big fan of European side laning. I think that only really G2 were good at that in the last year, really. I think that was a huge... actually, Mirwin was sometimes okay at that too, on Mad KOI, credit to him. But it's not been an EU specialty since 2018, 2019.
Yeah, people like Perks and way back in the day. Yeah, Nuked up all those guys. Yeah.
Wonders Camille, stuff like that. EU side laning has not been great. So at least just kind of, I'm not going to say taking the L, but understanding the reality of the situation where you're not going to be balanced on the map like Bin is on BLG, where like he knows he can always get value out of a side lane and then he'll pay it back and blah, blah, blah. Knowing that he can just pick a different champion pool and say, well, okay, this will do for now and it'll be better than most other teams will attempt to as well. I appreciate that at least. But that does hinge on the fact that he needs to be playing well individually, and I don't think well, we already said that the Olaf wasn't great in the one game he played versus BDS. Sad for the revenge match for him. So if he turns up more individually in a laning phase sense and his 1v1s go better, then maybe that fixes some of the issues for kind of like objective setups and sideline macro for this team, but bit of a long shot. He needs to have a real recovery.
One of the best teams of the week, obviously, was the much vaunted Karmine Corp lineup. Now, I will say, because they essentially, my joke about them doing that LEC article where it's like the little prince of esports is, you've actually, unless you just said he was the king, you've just hyped him to an impossible level. Like, essentially, you'll have to actually be like Faker or Caps straight out of the gate, or it's always overhyped. So I feel like that distracts from the fact that if that didn't exist, we would now be going crazy about this guy. Like, not only has he been years out where it's like you could tell he was coming and eventually he was going to be on one of these French squads. But mate, if you just watch that game against fucking, I think it was the Movistar game, some of the moves, like if you're the Movistar players, a normal game, you would win that game. He just kept like fucking sidestepping shit and moving. He's a stud. Yeah, it was baller as fuck. I got to give him up. It was really legit. Yeah.
Yeah, because Jojo was coming into this game 2, where he had an awesome game in game 1 versus Fnatic. You had both these teams. KC beat G2 through a couple of miracle objective steals and much better mid and late game, which I'm sure felt very good for Yike. And then Humanoid got wrecked by Jojo on individual level, and the rest of the team was playing very, very well through lane. So this looked like 2 very good teams on form. And then Jojo picks Ahri, very good playmaking champion, and he just jumps into Kalista on cooldown even after getting shut down early game. And as an Ahri player, I can tell you one of the most scary things for an Ahri player is you're behind a game, and normally when you jump in, you expect someone to move backwards because they're afraid of your immediate burst damage, and instead they just step into you, and they just hands check you. It's one of the most terrifying things as Ahri because you're not tanky, and if they do step into you, your first dash out doesn't save you. You need to have like a second dash out really too. So Kalista was really good at just being like, okay, dodge the charm, step forwards into it, dodge it, kill. And Jojo just could not get the right plays. He didn't get the charms on target. Even if he did hit them, pretty sure he'd just get cleansed away from and die anyway. So Kalista, real credit to him for not losing his head, not getting cowed by rivalry and stuff like that. He said that the pressure hadn't got to him, and actually I believe him at this point. His laning phases were good, and he was just hands checking a lot. He was doing pretty well. Obviously the game 3 of the week for him, they lost against GiantX. Yeah. And I think, but I will say, I mean, the laning phase wasn't awesome there, but I will say I think that Noah and Jun are looking very good as a 2v2, so I'm not going to like discredit them too hard for that. And I also just think jungle support was quite far behind because of the proactive moves from that. But yeah, Kalista, I'm very happy with how he played for first week, especially with all the pressure put down on him. Yeah, I suppose there is a conversation we had about, how much hype was reasonable. Does this kind of create artificial kind of results on what he's doing right now? Because he is playing really well, but how much does that get amped up by everything that's happening behind it? I'm very happy with how he's playing, but let's also like try and bring this to a reality standpoint too. I hope he keeps doing well. He's a very sweet guy as well. From hearing him in interviews, stuff like that. He's not arrogant. He seems to be very down to earth. Isn't getting ahead of himself. I don't think he's not putting himself down, but I think there's a calm confidence there. But he's just taking it game by game, which I think is very important. You can't kind of you got to do the legwork first, and I think he's doing that. But yeah, I think across the rest of the team from KC, Vladdy's been excellent. I think if you looked at a rookie beyond, well, yeah, there were 3 rookies from last year which did really quite well. I think there was Jackie's, obviously. I think there was Alvaro from Mad KOI, and then I think there was Vladdy as well. And I think Vladdy came in at obviously a very difficult point for KC, where I was wondering whether he might tank his career by coming into a failing KC. There's always a worry. Yep. Given the amount of rookies which come in for one split on a crap team and you never see them again.
I mean, the most famous example is Checker Lad. That guy had a decent hype coming in LEC. He had like the one split and then he's like forgotten into like Twilight Zone or something, like he's never allowed back apparently.
And there's a dozen players like that. I'm sure there are a dozen players, because obviously we forgot them because they've been there for one split. And now it's years now since some of them. Yeah. And, occasionally a couple of them make a comeback, but it's very rare to get second chances like that. Obviously, GenX and Rika are currently having it on SK, but that's not necessarily working out for them in the best sense right now. But yeah, Vladdy's been fantastic, even coming in a weird split. I think that he's been a good individual laner. I think that his team fighting instincts have been very good, and his champion pool is pretty strong too. So I'm hoping that when it comes into Fearless, he'll be able to contribute that again. And I think probably the person who comes out as like their MVP from week 1 for me is Canna, because Canna was like a little bit whatever, I suppose, in that last split where it felt like he just kind of phoned it in a little bit. He has been playing very, very well individually. He, in the G2 game, completely blasted Caps when Caps looked like he was going to carry G2 on the Akali. He just found him in some crucial spots as Jace and just completely destroyed him. So yeah, I think that compared to last year where KC had a random dice roll as to who would just be the weak link in the team and lose them a game, I don't think that's the case now. I think they've actually got a lot of people on very good form. Targamas even on good form. I think he had a good week 1, which yeah, given the amount of crap that he went through last year, and I think his form was very off, it's good to see that he can play to that level. You know, if that's something we can see more from him, all for it. You know, like I'm all for criticizing players when they're bad, but if you're going to turn up, sure, yeah, you deserve that comeback angle. So yeah, I think that KC against KOI particularly, what I found very interesting was their ability to just kind of like hard commit to skirmishes. I thought that was actually a very good strategical decision for them. They were playing against an KOI draft, which is very much about laning. They managed to drag them out of lane and into skirmishes for like random first bloods and early fights in River. That was actually quite intelligent because it stopped Jojo being a very good laner. I think he's one of the best. He was probably the best NA native laning mid laner
for sure.
for ever.
Yeah, he's really good.
And to deny that from him, to deny Super and Alvaro their 2v2 laning as well, and to say, all right, come skirmishes. They lose the skirmishes, come away from that. That was pretty good. So yeah, I'm happy with how KC have worked with that. And also, more importantly than that too, I'm glad that Movistar KOI and KC is a hype matchup, but also a good matchup now. And that's exactly what the LEC needs. So
because obviously the fan bases are hyped and primed, ready to go. So we actually want it to be a real game. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, by the way, because I actually think the underrated part about KC, this is how, here's the thing. One thing I have learned, admittedly, I can't actually live up to this when it comes to Faker fans, because they actually go to the absolute limit, because unsurprisingly, their player was the fucking GOAT, wasn't he? So they are intolerable. But actually, KC fans will tell me, like, you missed here, French people, no, you idiot, that was a bad fucking lineup that I actually thought would be really good in winter, was terrible, did nothing, and then even worse, you all doubled down like idiots a million fucking times, and you deserved to get absolutely wrecked like you did throughout that year. And actually, it was only people like Vladdy and them and Cannon who came in and saved it in summer, but it just wasn't good enough. I actually think I'm going to go the other way to a lot of people. Bro, the narratives when Canna joined this team, I remember telling everyone on all the shows, there's nothing wrong with this move at all. Like, first of all, if I'm just gambling on it for a last split when I'm not even a fucking good team, by the way, a more than serviceable fucking pickup, I'm sick and tired of people doing this stupid fan take where there's only the absolute best players in the world and everyone else is last place and shit. Yeah. Like, Canna was literally a fucking, I won't say world class, but he could play at like the international level in fucking Korea, my God. Like, yes, his problem is why he wasn't on T1, guys, is one, they had Zeus waiting, and two, he wasn't like one of the best tops in the world. That's T1 standards. You even look on D+. Yes, his problem on D+ is obvious. He isn't Khan, he isn't Nagori, they're generational potential players. So again, the same thing to a fan, he's the reason D+ didn't win. Like, that's not even true. There's plenty of other reasons too. So if you tell me you're bringing over a guy who I know has hands, I know can play carry games, I know you could chuck onto a Renekton, and he's going to, get ready, Nymaera, the region is LEC. Are you fucking kidding me? This guy was always going to walk in and have a chance to be good. And actually, as you say, if anything, by the way, he now looks like sort of a shrewd player to have in your team, because he even somehow operates. I mean, he's done it with Closer, he's now done it with Yak. It's looking totally fine. Yeah, I agree with you on the Targamas angle too. One, yes, he's had 2 years where I think he was a massive problem, the number one problem. But let's not forget, one, he did play with Kalista when he used to be in the LFL. That helps, and he had the same coach. And then two, I'm not going to delete 2020 fucking 2. That did happen. He did make all those roams. He did have like a bunch of great players. Like, he's clearly not an absolute... This is one thing I don't think people get, right? You're taking the narrative too far, guys, that you think because he's Belgian, which means you can speak French, that means he has to be in this team. He isn't actually... Dude, they didn't even keep Adam on fucking BDS. Like, you have to actually be still also really good to also stay on these teams. They're not really letting a guy who's an empty chair do that. In fact, I even had an interesting angle I'll throw to you, which is what Yamato said on Summoning Insight was that when he actually coached Targamas, this is a very interesting angle. He said one of the reasons Targamas sometimes would be silent is because he's the type of guy who just takes it for granted. You get a concept and it doesn't have to be explained sometimes. So whereas maybe you'd want him to come all the time or something, he would just sort of think, I'm sure they see that too. And it's like, they didn't necessarily, by the way, you can't take that for granted, it turns out. So I think people actually have somewhat maligned the idea of Karmine Corp ever being good, whereas you look at the roster, obviously week 1 was a little bit good, but this team absolutely is going to be at least middle of the pack. They're going to be exciting. They're going to win some games for sure.
Yeah, and especially on the whole communication thing, I think a lot of that has stuck around from that really strange documentary which XL put out when Targamas was on there too. And there was that one clip of like, oh, can we go now? After just so he was asked.
Well, the weirdest thing is, both those teams released comms. It's almost like they were trying to do this guy over. XL did it from that Nightmare game, and then fucking Karmine Corp at the end did it. It's like, bro, you trying to get this guy kicked? Because as soon as every fan heard that, they were like, get him out. Like,
And it's like not everything can be breaking point. Like
Yes.
I understand.
Yes.
Sometimes it's fantastic and it's a great window inside teams. And in some ways, I think it is a great way to give windows inside teams for fans who just don't get that kind of atmosphere otherwise. But also just like that seemed just like a hit piece at a certain point. And I'd really like to kind of follow up on that point you talked about Canna as well in terms of is every import going to be world tier or nothing? Plenty of players do not do that well within a Korean structured team and do much better elsewhere. There are a bunch of players who leveled up after they left Korea because they went into minor regions. I mean, some players went into like TCL and did okay. They've gone over to NA. They've gone over to Europe. They've been obviously into LPL hugely. I mean, Doonby, he's a Korean national and obviously did incredibly well over in LPL and a bunch of other players. And I'm not saying that it's all of these are the prime example of that. But no, hell, one of the best players in Europe ever was Rainover. He was awful in Korea. This guy was like, he was known as Game Over. And he ended up completely, he had the perfect split in 2015 summer. Not every player is going to do as well in like the Korean, very structured, coach real heavy authority style. And of course it works well for the Korean teams, and I'm not saying it doesn't bring results, but not every player will thrive within that system. And we had this conversation last year about not all imports are the same when it came to Noah, Ice, and Rahel.
Yes.
Like the 380 carry kind of Korean imports. And Swiffer was very vocal at the time, just saying like, no, we're not picking this guy up because he's a Korean import and he's the same as the other three. Actually, he has very different playstyle, and we did see that actually. Ice was a bit more reserved but consistent. Rahel was kind of jumping in on the aggressive picks, and Noah was like, actually was even more aggressive than Rahel. They had some similarities there, but you see, there would like more identifiers of that. So yeah, Canna coming in or any import coming in, like I'm always willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I mean, yes, I mean I will reasonably bring up doubts if they have a career record. I'm saying, okay, well maybe they didn't do well in this kind of environment or whatever. But Canna's done very well on an individual level. I think. I was chatting to Finn earlier today as well, and he was saying that he thinks that Canna was the best laning top laner of LEC in week 1, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And if he can keep playing around that, it's a great platform for the team to have. So yeah, KC, compared to last year where they had a lot of individual failures which were costing them cheap games, that's not going to be the case anymore. It seems like they do have some strategy overhead, and if they can keep up momentum, I think they're one of the best teams in the league to have fire in their bellies and a huge amount of momentum behind them. They will absolutely always have the crowd with them, regardless of who they're facing. And I don't think they're going to be cowed by the big occasions. So yeah, I think they are now a contender team. We'll see how far that takes them, but I'm happy with how they performed in week 1.
Yeah, to me, I think people aren't looking at the actual profile. They're getting caught up in the narratives or the French angle or is this person hyped? If you think about it, right, just think about the game from Yike's perspective and you'll realise how good this team is, which is he's got like one of the potentially like prodigy AD carry players. By the way, if you're a jungler, it's fucking amazing to have a sick ADC you can just gank over and over and over again. That's it. That everyone knows the bot lane is where you get the gank early in the game, and actually still in League of Legends to the modern day, you can still end the game very quickly if you get those kills and get you guys ahead. Then you look at his solo lanes. His solo lanes are actually probably both slightly underrated. They just don't have the name value. So I look at this going, also, I agree with you. In G2, you're walking into a team full of people who are like, I've already won LEC or I've done everything. If you come in this team, I don't know if he's going to, but I would actually hope Yike becomes like the captain of this team or is like a big voice and a presence, because this team would be flawless for that, I think.
Yeah, and a really important thing about that, I think a lot of people will phrase this as Yike kind of like gaining this part of his playstyle and unlocking a part. He was this in LFL. This is what he was in LDLC. Right. He was the guy that was leading the macro. In fact, he was really quite revolutionary at the time at kind of like his first 2 clears. He was really, really good at all times staying very close to mid lane and getting like a 1 killer play in mid lane whilst also very efficiently full clearing. But the way he would optimize his jungle pathing was to like make sure he was like spending more time on Raptors and Wolves, who was like that little bit closer to mid lane, but then also always at the end of his jungle path putting 1 ward down into the enemy jungle, so he always had a platform to make plays around mid. He was really on point with that. He was the one calling this stuff, saying, okay, I want to make plays around here. I think it was quite difficult on G2 to be like, well, yes, he probably was going to be playing second fiddle to some of the greatest players that Europe's had ever, actually, at this point. G2 deserve that. These players deserve that kind of recognition. So for me, it's good to see that Yike kind of revisit what he was more like on LDLC in the LFL. And I hope that he can be that kind of more unlocked person now, where he doesn't feel like there's a chain of authority or seniority that he has to abide to. And if that combos up well with the Targamas as well, who, if he can kind of latch onto that kind of energy, that's perfect for this team.
let's just get out the way. We'll do SK Gaming, because here's the problem.
Right.
I always say it every single year, because I actually used to work for SK Gaming over 10 years ago, and as a result, I've always basically been able to have connections with the org and know kind of like what they're doing and what the vision for the team is. So I've always told people every year, they are not, and never will, as far as I know, try to be the teams that spend the lowest and go for the big names and get to the top of the league. I've even heard they even had like a sort of formula the past few years where it's like you'd have one big name. I'm sure it was Niski last year. I'm sure that before that it was Treats, etc. You'd have the one big name that you do pay a good, like he's going to be like your key figure, so you bring him in for good money. But the rest you gamble on like shrewd pickups from ARLs, or you get players that other people didn't want and you think they can be reclaimed, as it were. And they're always trying to basically be the min-max team. And I have to say, if you look at LEC history, it's often worked. They've often been able to creep into that last playoff spot while spending, maybe the 9th salary amount in the league, but getting like a 7th or a 6th place, which at that time was enough for them. They wanted presence in European League Legends. They weren't trying to stack trophies with G2 and Fnatic and the rest of them. The problem is, this one looks like, well, where's the fucking guy you're paying the money to? That's the problem. Like, I don't see the star on this team. Like, so every player, like, look, I don't really know the Loopy guy that well, but I don't think the other 4 are bad players. If people don't even know, I have heard behind the scenes, people do think that Rika just didn't look that good on that one Mad Lion split, and actually they did expect him to come back to LEC eventually, and he developed as a player, blah, blah. By the way, people like Peter don't love that guy if you don't know. Like, there's people will speak well of this guy. Isma certainly had times last year. He was good. GiantX, by the way, I think is a competent top player. I can see why he role swapped. He was never going to be a star mid laner for me. So I thought Raya was good. So I don't hate the squad. It's just I look at the squad and I'm like, this looks like the most cynical min-max I think I've ever seen, bro. Like I would be really shocked if even the other LEC teams were trying to get some of these players. It almost looks like you just picked up whoever you wanted and just made this bizarre line. What do you think? Because even though they're 0-3 right now, I don't want to say they won't win any games. I don't like every player sucks, but I just don't know what am I supposed to enjoy about this squad? What am I supposed to get into?
Well, I mean, it's really hard to... Where do I start with this? Because, I mean, like, GiantX and Rika won EMEA Masters with SkewMond and Paris on the team. So, like, 4 out of the 5 players on that team are now up in LEC. I think GiantX was a journeyman LEC top player. He was fine. He was passable. Like, he was definitely LEC tier. I think that if you go back and watch his ERL games, I think it's quite clear that he gets dragged down to the level of ERL games. So I'm not going to hold his ERL games as heavily against him, because I'm like, sure, whatever.
Especially if you still win. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you kind of get dragged to the level of the occasion, hopefully that means you can do that against good teams too. So I've got a lot of time for GiantX, and yeah, Rika was a player who did very well in ERLs, and then now he's had 2 stints up in the LEC where I don't know what's getting to him, but something must be getting to him.
Does he become a different player to you?
Yeah, he had a very wide champion pool in ERLs. He was very aggressive.
Right.
And then suddenly comes up to the LEC and he's playing 2 games back-to-back of Galio. He does get the 1 game of Yoni and looks better on it, but I'm like, realistically, I want this guy to be more a proactive playmaker rather than kind of following things, especially when you don't have like a great leader on your team. I don't think there's anyone really with a leadership personality on this team.
I mean, 2 of them are Korean for a start off, so it's going to be hard to be
when they're playing,
talking.
Especially when they're in Europe in kind of like shorter term kind of being here too. And Isma, I mean, we've had this conversation even on this show before last year, where I think that Isma is one of the worst players in the LEC at adapting to plan B. You don't want that from a leader. Your leader is meant to be the guy that kind of takes stock of the situation and says, okay, this went wrong, this is what we're doing now. And I don't trust Isma with that necessarily either. So yeah, now that things are at 0-3, the pressure's going to be mounting even more. You've got GiantX and Rika who are on their second chances. That's already a rarity. If you mess this up, I don't think you're coming back. This might be the end of like your top level career, and that is a very daunting prospect for players who put their lives into this. I've not been a big fan of how Isma and Loopy have paired up as a duo. I think that Loopy, in the game against G2, it was going pretty well in the early game, where Isma got a bunch of early kills because G2 just completely overestimated themselves in some early skirmishes. But then it slowly fell away with a bunch of disconnected players, where Loopy was going into the enemy jungle without, as much as we said this about Adam earlier and a couple of other players, you can't really move into the enemy jungle without damage behind you to back you up. And he just walks up, runs into 3 people. Doesn't matter that you're ahead 4 or 5k or whatever, you just die because no one else is coming to help you. That happened a bunch of times. It sets them behind the map. It means you don't have your support putting wards down for objectives, and the game becomes very difficult at that point. I think that the laning phase from GiantX, Rika, and Rahel hasn't been anything particularly special. The drafts have been actually okay, I will say. I think the drafts have been okay, but actually that might even be a problem, because if they're already losing with good drafts, that's not even a point to fix.
True.
their coaching staff changed in the background. I don't know where you fall back on this team. If you have a problem in a team, you normally expect there to be a bedrock somewhere you fall back on, you build off of. You don't have your star players, as you're saying. You don't have existing well, you have like solo lane combination, right? But you don't have like insane combinations to work around. You don't have a coaching staff which has got something to fall back on as well. It's hard to find bright sparks. You know, like it's our bloody jobs to find bright sparks for teams and give an angle. This is just hard. And sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and say, look, SK are in real trouble. There must be a huge turnaround from somewhere. Maybe it comes from just very different champions for Rahel and Enrique. Maybe just give Rahel Kai'Sa again. You just aim for like Kai'Sa games and you try and play for like Hyper Dive, completely change composition. But Europe's shown that it can't even play those style of compositions particularly well right now. Anyway, this is rough. This is really rough. And also, I mean, what was that? Their strength of schedule wasn't even that strong for this week, right? They played against okay, GX is 3-0, sure, whatever. But like, there's some questions about that. They lost to Heretics, who were. I don't think I saw a single person put Heretics above last place in their tier list. And then G2, sure, whatever. Okay, so you've played against GX, who look pretty good, and G2, well, in one of their weakest weeks they've ever shown. Next week, they've got Karmine Corp, who look good, and they have MKOI as well. Sure, Vitality look a bit ropey, but if they lose against Karmine Corp and they lose against MKOI, they're already on 5 losses, and they're pretty much out. That's it. That's your split done. Pressure does not get easier from that. I think these are a bunch of players where pressure is going to affect them a lot. It's hard to be an SK fan right now.
I'll give you the biggest Corp angle of all time, which is the one person who has a lot to prove in this team is actually the new coach order. Mate, if you somehow get anything out of this squad, we will just assume you must be cracked. Like, I'm sorry, like, that's the best I can do as sort of like a backhanded compliment in a way. Okay, let's move on. I'll tell you what, let's go to the topic, and I'm kind of bouncing between here, not to make it so that, especially I don't want people to just tune out after we do the G2 Fnatic part. So I'm going to bounce between, exactly. So I think let's do the Fnatic one, because I want to give everyone a little, everyone knows it's Master. I like to give a little bit of a peek behind the curtain so you can see the fucking Wizard of Oz who's really pulling all the levers, etc. Right? When I overhype these teams, Nymaera, like where Forgiven comes back to Schalke and everyone's like, well, how could you ever think he's going to be good? He hasn't played against. Or how about when Upset was on Vitality and then on Karmine Corp? They think, oh, you're just glazing these players. Right, guys, I don't claim to have the best connections in the scene. I'm also not the guy who's like a super social guy. I'm not DMing people after every game. But when people are like long-term players, especially the ones that are smart and can sort of see I'm the guy who's like all in on their stock and they know that I'm going to sort of tell their story, I do get the stories from those people before the splits if they're owning all the scrims. So a lot of people won't know. Schalke was actually one of the best scrim teams before that dreaded split where they lost all the games. Believe it or not, Karmine Corp, actually, even with Sakan and Cabochard, was winning scrims before last winter. And I can tell you what, even though Vitality came last place, they were fucking winning scrims. Like, I'm sorry, if I know that, I'm not going to go, they're complete shit like this last game. They'll never do anything. That's actually a moment where it's like, mate, if they can get it together, it's plausible. Again, I'm not doing a scrim box like they have to be the best team, but there's something there. There's something going on behind the scenes, right? It's understandably, I am hyped for this fucking Fnatic team. As you say, all the markers behind the scenes are all fucking pointing up. Everyone clearly seems to think the roster's good. By the way, the players themselves look like they fuck with this mix. Grabs looks, I mean, he's done about 50 tweets, guys. He looks super re-energized to be back with the big names and have a chance to prove himself, etc. Yeah, obviously, you look at the roster, and there's some interesting ones there. What will Upset and Mickey X look like? You hope it'll be Upset and Hylissang at their peak. Let's see. Obviously, Razork and Humanoid. Listen, I've realised 2 years ago, because they can never move that Humanoid contract, and you'd be a moron to actually ask for it at another org. Basically, if you're in Fnatic, every day you have to repeat to yourself like some 1984 slogan, like Razork and Humanoid synergy is fine and was never a problem and never will be a problem, because you'd just be depressed otherwise. So at this point in time, you've just accepted whatever they're going to give you, you're going to take it, and you're just going to hope the rest of the squad works. So I have to say, I do really think this team will be in the finals. I think there will be a top 2 team. I also, by the way, I don't care what anyone says, I do rate Grabs. I do think he's good. I think part of his problem, by the way, is he actually did, in my opinion, he tried to do what I just said about the owner guy, and that's why it didn't work. He went from being the guy, if you want to use football terminology, who is like a fucking man management guy. If you give him the superstars, think about when Zidane was at like Real Madrid, he just had the best team already. Tell you what, he could manage those big egos and find when to motivate people. But the problem is, some people as managers and coaches aren't the guy who takes the lesser players and the people you haven't heard of and works from. Some people are suited elsewhere. So this is, for me, Grabs is back where he belongs. He should have a team like this where his job for me is keep people's egos in check, tell people when they're not going to get their picks and stuff, and we're going to play through other picks. That's its own task, and it's its own skill set. It's just a very different skill set from Peter Dodd and fucking Mac and Pad and the people who get the rookies and shape them. So I actually think, for me, across the board, there are possible flaws, but I just don't really... I think Fnatic has to be one of the best teams in this league, mate. It just looks like a great group of players for me.
I think there is an argument to say if Fnatic don't win any split this year, they have failed. I think when you put this amount of talent
Absolutely.
I mean, the one caveat to that is that, not all of these players are at peak. But I look at the roster, I look at the players on there, and I look at the coaching staff. The project you put together, if you do not win with G2 looking like, you're having to rebuild as well, if you don't win a single split, I think this team, something's gone wrong with this team. Now, the problem with the week 1 results is that there's a lot of mud in the water because there's a game against Skarner and a game with Skarner. Champion's not fair. If that champion's in a game, really doesn't tell you much about the team. It's 100% ban rate in LPL, and I think it's 100% win rate and presence in LCK as well. Maybe it's missed one game or something. Champion's just absolutely busted. So yeah, that 2 out of the 3 games, not telling us that much. But yeah, from the internal scrim bucks that we're hearing about, yeah, this team is looking very, very good. And I think a huge thing which has come through from the gameplay I've seen so far is jungle support's working well together. But importantly, whenever Razork is going for something, actually Upset is in the pocket incredibly well. And that's a big thing because one of the biggest criticisms of Upset on Karmine Corp was he just bails out of fights too early because he had
trust issues, mate. He really did.
Yeah, no, and you can kind of understand that. It's like,
sure,
if your team is losing, do you just cut the losses early, or do you just try and fight to get something out of it? And obviously that was not working very well on Karmine Corp, and he would just never commit to anything because he didn't believe in any of the fights that were going to be won. Because it looks like, Razork is choosing good angles, Upset is actually ride or dying with him. And he's just jumping over the wall as the Ezreal. And he had a fantastic Ezreal game. I'm trying to remember what his other games were as well. But, they had some really good kind of follow-up plays. Yeah, the game against Vitality, the laning phase when... Yeah, maybe not the best I've ever seen with that. But, yeah, no, I was happy with how he was playing. I think the one question on this roster is Oscarinen. That's the one guy I'm like, okay, if things go to a top level, can things fall apart? Yeah, a little bit. He just occasionally has just a duff game. He has great games too. He has lane diffed, Broken Blade. He had that one game where he absolutely slaughtered 369 at MSI as well. So he has an upper ceiling, which is pretty good. I think if he has like an aggressive lane state where he can kind of push an advantage, he's very good. That's the one person I think you have to plan around and hide his weaknesses a bit, but hopefully that's something as a team they can do. And then Humanoid needs to just really take things seriously. Someone's got to lock him in just mentally. If that happens, yeah, I think Fnatic should be absolutely a top team. And if they're not, I don't know if it's going to get better for you. But like Fnatic fans have been waiting a hell of a long time. You've got a great project coming together here with G2 also rebuilding for a little bit now. This is the time to strike. We'll see what happens in week 2. Who are they facing in week 2? I should have checked that before this. Rogue should be an easy win. G2 on the second day, and then BDS. So yeah, the Fnatic G2 one, slam that one out, get yourself some momentum, and this team should be really gunning for finals, I think.
I'm not even on some Corp angle with Humanoid, by the way. First of all, I'll just say this because I can do things like this. I've heard from people who played with him, mate, he just doesn't give a fuck. And not necessarily, listen, some people like it and think it's in a good way. Like, he doesn't get affected by that. I'll tell you what, some people think it was negative, Nymaera, and they really just think he's just like, whatever. Like, don't give a fuck. I think I am elite, but whatever, it's only me in caps. It's one of those bullshit angles to me. And I don't know how much to say. Fuck it, I'll say it. I've even heard at one point in the past, he said to other players, like, lol, I might just, this was back when there was money there, by the way. Lol, I'll probably just go to LCS in a year or two anyway and just get fucking millions of dollars, which is not what you want to hear when, if I ask fans, the last few years they'd have been telling me he's next in the lineage of caps, to be like a fucking champion and make Fnatic back on top. But here's the good news. He's been doing this the last 3 years. I don't have to delude myself down here. I'll take the Humanoid that was the last few years because in this team, it's not about Humanoid being the MVP of the league. This team is about Humanoid. Give me the 1 out of 3 carry games, the 1 out of 3 all right games, and you can have that 1 out of 3 games where you play like shit like you did in this first week, mate. You can do that one. Because in this team, what is different about this one from last year is everyone knows after the summer split in that first time that Noah joined, he never made it to that playoffs and beyond. beyond. Then he had all these issues on pressure, and he clearly had like fucking times where he himself, by the way, just wouldn't go into fights, or he would misstep and die. Like, the difference is Razork is a demon. He is fucking really good. And I agree with you. Upset knows which way his bread's buttered, mate. He knows that, like, this is the guy that can get me, like, that LEC title, that status. So if those two players play like carries, I think the floor of the team should be pretty good. And that's without even mentioning who knows what Mickey X's level can be. That is the sort of play. It's why, if you don't know, talking to the fans here, people will just endlessly gamble on Hylissang. Because if he ever has a split back again, you're going to look like a genius, aren't you? So when you're Mickey X, you don't care how many times you entered last year. You just like, look, Mickey, it's a different team, blah, blah, blah. And then you just hope you get the Mickey X that went to XL and they came back to G2 the first time. So I think the potential for this team's really good, even with the flaws. The flaws can almost like coexist and still be good, I think.
I really hope that Jojo coming into the league and being a laning specialist and then kind of slapping Humanoid can wake Humanoid up. I hope that happens. Sometimes, yeah, and if Humanoid is, I've not necessarily heard personally myself, but if he is not exactly mentally checked and it's like, oh, it's just me and Caps and whatever, and he only turns up for games against Caps, or if that's the situation, hopefully having another player like that can unlock that a little bit too. Because at the end of the day, I think all of us want the best version of all of our players, because actually we're here for the best League of Legends.
Absolutely.
And I'm hoping that Mickey, after getting kicked from G2, does the same thing he did on XL back in the day and has actually a very good split, and he can start turning up too. Because yeah, if that happens for both these players, then as I was saying, Fnatic should really be looking at trophies.
And I will just tell you, I actually know Mickey X a bit. He's one of the people I have talked to. And I can tell you, this is a guy, and Upset loves this, by the way. He is the guy who will duo queue with his fucking ADC all the time if you want to. Like that, and that is actually underrated in the modern day. There are some players just don't do that, or they just don't want to. They want to play the script. So I actually love when players do that, because I think that's how you get that, like, Upset Hylissang with the best of the West 2021 type form. That's how you get that fucking synergy where they were one of the only Western bot lanes, if you remember, like in 2022, could even play Lucian Army. Like they had something to their game. Like, so I'm hoping we can just have a repeat of that. So yeah, I'm hyped on Fnatic, mate. I'm kind of in on them. I'm in. What about, you've referenced them a million times, so let's do it. Obviously, right, first of all, I will say, it's a little bit tricky that they call Movistar now, not Mad Lions. Yeah. But okay, as long as we remember that, we're all good.
I heard someone call them McCoy once, and now I can't unhear it.
That's pretty good, actually. Okay. Great Scott! Okay, there you go. That's a free one for you. Okay, right, whatever. Because I have to say, bro...
That'll come to the broadcast, don't you worry.
Here's another example of where people do just go way too far on, like, the drama outside the server. Right, yeah, I absolutely did think that Winter Mad Lions last year was gassed as fuck, and part of it's like, look, I'll tell you right now, boys, in the time machine, if I could pop out the time machine and tell Striker, whoa, let Adam cook, I don't think you'd even be in that final. I think that would have been BDS versus G2 that time around. But you know what? You made that one split when it was Fugazi. But actually, I always say this, by the end of the year, the only player I thought could not play in this team was the mid laner Frascovi. It was obvious to me. And so I actually think the rest of them throughout different times in the year all showed real potential and real form. And Yoyo already I knew was good. So I actually think this is fabulous GMing. I remember seeing this lineup and thinking, bro, of all the teams as well, this is even almost a perfect one to send Jojo to, because it's actually like a fully formed team that has synergies and the coaches on the same page. If you join this team, by the way, remember the lesson we're supposed to learn from Cloud9 Jojo is he needs to have a big time jungler like Inspire to hold his hand. Spoiler, you have to play Elyoya's way. It is Elyoya's way or the fucking highway. Just ask Niski. So I think this is like an awesome team. And I'm with you, by the way. I've always said this. One thing you absolutely can hype Jojo around is he is your new double lifter if you're an NA fan. He has real hands that are fucking exciting to watch, and he does actually seem to have this confidence that isn't fake. He really believes he can be a world-class player, and I'll tell you what, he's going to have a way better chance in the modern day doing it in LEC than fucking LTA, which is the fucking graveyard right now. So I'm hyped on this team, mate. I could also see this, if put it this way, I had them as my third team after G2 and Fnatic. If G2 fucks around, this team could be in the final. They could be contesting the title potentially.
Yeah, especially when, well, Fearless will be really good for Mirren too.
Absolutely, yeah.
Weird stuff. Once you get into Fearless, this guy will have some different angles. In China, it's always been the case that, well, their belief has been that one-tricks do better in Fearless because you don't always get a chance to play your one-trick in, like, good metas and good situations in standard drafting. But in Fearless, there's just, like, that always, like, thread the needle where you get into that last draft and you think, oh, yeah, actually, I can play this one-trick. And that's like, the end of your series is completely blown out. Stuff like that. So I'm excited for that. This team went to Worlds with 4 ERL rookies last year. Now, obviously, one of them's been replaced, but that was actually insane. And now they've replaced their weakest part in Frescovi. And don't get me wrong, I feel bad for him because he was his first year in LEC, and he still went to Worlds. No, he was the worst player on his team, but he still made it to Worlds with the team after coming from ERLs. Yeah. But yeah, Jojo coming in, definitely leveling up. I think that Super and Alvaro have kicked things off to a good start in this year, and I think Mewin's individual laning's been good, and his team fighting's been good too. So yeah, I think that this team, they got caught up a little bit in buying into the skirmishes, the Karmine Corp, and we talked about that from the Karmine Corp perspective of them just drawing them out of the laning phase into the river and into the jungle instead of really just playing through good laning phase, and that did not help them. So I think there's maybe some higher level decision making which needs some work at some point. But yeah, this team has really good stock value in terms of just individual player strength. That's definitely good for them. I think that they'll have, similar momentum and hype behind them to a Karmine Corp. They have ridiculous amount of Spanish legacy behind them.
Sure.
They are now a combination of 3 Spanish orgs, Mad Lions, Movistar Riders, and KOI. And, they've been around for forever. So, yeah, that's going to be pretty insane. And, yeah, I think that having that year of LEC under their belt already and having, they got to a finals in Winter and they did go to Worlds and stuff. Yeah, this team is probably going to be on the up, and I think that hopefully Fearless will unlock a lot more for them. So this, to me, is, again, another kind of contender team, depending on how the meta goes and how they adapt to Fearless when it comes to the playoffs, stuff like that. If they don't, they should be making it to playoffs, and they should be a threat.
And even if it is true, there are certain players on some teams, Noah was one, obviously Nukon, BD. There are certain players I have like a contentious relationship with because they can't handle me flaming them, basically. Apparently, everyone always tells me that you should 41. What I don't get is why is every fucking person who's a teenager or 21 obsessed with what a 41-year-old British guy thinks about the fucking game? I'll never get it. Well, we all know why it's those 190,000 followers, isn't it? But I don't get it myself, mate. You're making me relevant, you idiots. I'm just supposed to be some boomer talking about the game from fucking Counter-Strike, but keep making me the like bad guy that you're going to battle against like Vince McMahon in the WWE. Because here's the difference. What people will never realise is if you ever actually listen to the shows where I do the analysis, not the fucking hot takes, I always give people their due. So even though, look, Noah, he can fuck off. He absolutely did not show to me he is like Fnatic level, world-class international player. He showed me he had some issues and he has to reclaim himself, GX. Super, on the other hand, I will give all the praise in the world to. I thought this guy was a clown when he said that stupid shit after fucking Winter, that like, we're like the best bot lane in the world or whatever, or like we're as good as Ruin. I remember thinking like, oh, shut the fuck up. But you know what? Even though hands-wise he's never going to be Ruler or fucking Viper, guys, I tell you what, by the end of the year, he was the best player on that team. He played well at Worlds. He's actually a legit player for LEC level. Like, this guy, we're not a region that has like the dopest ADCs. He's a pretty good ADC for LEC, actually. I'll give him credit.
Yeah, and I think that because the laning phase is going well with him and Alvaro, it means that he can then unlock Alvaro, who I think is a very creative support. I think that they've also gone through a lot of development as a style as a team too, because one of the biggest, their big dip in form was after. So in Winter, they ganked bot lane a lot, worked out really well for them. And then they had that huge dip where they were trying to change styles and not focus on bot lane as much and go elsewhere. And Alvaro just didn't know what to do without that. They
never had the lane lead, did they? Like, they used to just gank bot lane all the time to open them up. Yep. Like, you're right. Once Alvaro couldn't do the roam, he went from looking, by the way, like the fucking revelation of the LEC. I thought he was insane in that Winter. Yes. But the problem was, all of a sudden, he was just like an okay player when he couldn't get out the lane.
Yeah, so that took a lot of adjusting to. However, when they got to Worlds, Alvaro was sick at Worlds. I thought this guy was incredible at Worlds. He had some fantastic plays. He had that one headbutt flash play too in that really crucial game. Was that against? Did he do that to Maple? I think he did that to Maple in that really crucial match against PSG. I think it was. I'm trying to remember. He had like one huge like Alistair kind of like flash knockup, which was really, really clutch, and he was doing a lot of that across the entire tournament. And yeah, obviously they didn't have the best Worlds result, but I think he actually did himself a lot of justice there. So if they come in on that kind of form again, have a good laning phase, and they have learned the lessons of actually we can start to unlock Alvaro without having just permanent jungle presence down here, that is absolutely huge. I think especially with a lot of teams kind of working around new jungle supports, with you having like your solidified one already in your Alvaro, maybe you can get a bit of a head start on that and kind of build off of that, because often teams which start a little bit slower, they're kind of playing catch up for a lot of the rest of the year. That tends to be the case. Not always the case, but it's definitely a factor which comes into it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to how this team comes apart. Like I said, there are some overhead decision-y things which I think that they need to be aware of. Don't get drawn into stupid fights which don't fit your comp. However, but again, much like we're saying for G2, can't draw all the conclusions off of best of ones. There's another thing there too. Like that game was still very scrappy and very fun. They think they showed a lot of mechanics in that one. Contender team, absolutely for sure.
Plus, even though now I am reviled in the Spanish community, I actually even had a rare banger that even they liked Nymaera. Because you know what? Every now and then, even though people obviously for nationalistic reasons get really upset when other people, by the way, I do too. If you tell me something shit about London, I'm going to go, who the fuck are you? But I tell you what, if I'm in the UK and I'm talking to you, Nymaera, I'm going to tell you London's trash. Why the fuck would I go there? It's a nightmare. Yeah. But I get it's just human nature. It's just a tribalistic aspect. But here's the problem.
London food thing around MSI.
I know.
I'm still not.
Every year that happens, it tilts the fuck out of me, bro. And then
Google Maps list.
And then you have idiots going like, I finally Nando's and fucking baked beans on top. It's like, get out my fucking face. So anyway, where this is going was, I actually did have one banger, which even the Spanish fans like. They could laugh at themselves on this on Nymaera, which is I just said when that rumour came out, like Jojo might join. I put that is genius. If you've just been fired for being late all the time, join a Spanish team. Because if you don't know, by the way, in Spain and Italy, when they have that siesta, it really is true. They just live on a different time. Like, the guy brings you your breakfast when he's finished making it, you know, he doesn't rush it out there. No one rushes over and asks what coffee you want. No one gives you it to go. That kind of is their culture. So actually, what's funny is, even though I was joking, it is sort of also true. I could actually see them being fairly easy going with Jojo and not being, like, too harsh on him and sort of work him into the squad. Yeah.
Yeah, and if he integrates in well, like this team's got a high up ceiling. It was always going to be a question. So I would obviously there is that question of well, who's going to bend to who, Yoya to Jojo or Jojo to Yoya, or if they have some incompatibilities like that. But at least with Jojo, it feels like he's just trying to smash lane and just move into the jungle anyway. So at least that's kind of working out for now. So I'm interested to see what happens if this team has a losing streak. That will be something. I think most teams can make it easy going until stuff starts to get hard. Obviously, that happened last year.
Sure.
Where they lost the finals and then suddenly big dip. There were some rumors around about internal kind of tension from that. I mean, it makes sense. Any losing team is going to have some tension because...
Yeah, but they do that thing where we use the euphemisms, don't they? Always go, they're very passionate. That means they argue all the time if things are going badly, guys, and they don't keep it in.
Yeah, and it's... Yeah, I mean, and that's not a
no, it can work.
I mean,
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like, I want people to air their grievances as long as it's in a constructive way that'll eventually lead to a better scenario. But yeah, believe it or not, players care about winning and losing because they're competitive players and it's their job to win. So yeah, I mean, I've got a tentative eye on what happens when they start losing because I mean, I just suppose is there another team I feel like that in the top ones? No, I think maybe this one because you've got some very big personalities. If they start getting a losing streak, I want to see if they can keep it together. If they make it over a hump like that, I'm sure they'll be much stronger for it. But that's the big question I've got for them. If they really bomb out of this split or something in playoffs and they get knocked out or something, let's see how they recover from that.
Also, for people worried that, like, obviously the rep has been justifiably earned that NA teams don't do that style of, like, frank discussion in VOD review and stuff. I'll say this, the typical way, because you never get to see that footage except for Breaking Point, the typical way that tended to work out actually was that it wasn't what you're all thinking, guys, that it's all just the big superstars or divas. If anything, it's the superstars that got in trouble if they would argue and want to hold standards in the VOD review. It would actually be, like, the weaker players who didn't want to be, like, bullied or he's being mean about it, etc. I think Jojo's the guy of person who I think he will like this. I think it will level him up to be in this super competitive environment where it is go, go, go. It's not just like, we play some solo queue and we're automatically the best. Like, he has to actually perform. I think that'll be good for him. I actually think this could be the next spur for his development. What about, let's just get this one out the way. As I said, look, I never had anything in my heart for them in the first place, but I've already written Heretics off. I know they beat SK, but I mean, just refer back to that point. Like, that's nothing right, at this point in time. Yeah. I just don't know what I'm supposed to get into about Heretics, man. I'm just not a fan. Look, I know people will tell me, like, Camilo and stuff's supposed to be good. Show me. Just show me, mate.
Dude, Camilo, in his own interviews, he was asked by Law or Sharks, whoever was interviewing on that day, said, so, it's like, so, how are you finding the LEC? It's like, I didn't think I'd be here. I don't know why I'm here. He's just like, so apparently because he's the only player that's ever gone from Div 2.
Yeah, it was fuck all. He wasn't. If people don't know, he wasn't even the guy who was like, winning EU Masters and stomping it. No, it was kind of a crazy pick. Yeah.
Yeah. So he just turned up out of nowhere and he was like, so why are you here? I don't know. I mean, obviously he's pretty laissez-faire about it, and credit to him. I mean, he's not pretending to be something he's not, I suppose, in that in that way. Couple of fun things about this team. I remember casting Carlson and Stend on different teams in NLC 2022. So these are another couple of those players like SkewMond, where I kind of like caught a snapshot earlier into their career. where Stend won NLC in 22, and he was a very creative, imaginative flanking rel player where you just come out of the middle of Fog of War and have these game-ending teamfight engages. Carlson was on a less successful Danish roster, Astralis Talent, where he was just a Renekton Aatrox player. He would play laning phase out well. Sometimes he'd struggle to adapt to a kind of like a adapting map, but apparently he leveled up a lot after that point. So obviously I've kind of missed some of that development as he's kind of gone on beyond that point. But yeah, first week, not looking fantastic, sadly, for this roster, where, I mean, you're not without talent on here. Flackett and Sheo have been good within LEC.
Yeah, they're competent players.
But I don't really know who else are we talking about this for in terms of SK? I don't really know what you fall back on here, and I don't know who your carry is. This was even a problem for Heretics last year.
Yes.
I mean, when they had Flackett is not the kind of guy who is going to be selfishly taking all of your resources and carrying your games.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people will get some false positives in the fact that Camilo got at least the LEC's best meta mid laner Victor for 3 games. That champion is super busted in Europe because we're playing that long range defensive style and you're trying to like protect them from getting dove on. So that'll make him and the team look better than they are. I think I'd imagine I'll just ban Victor away from this team. I don't really care about a lot of the other picks right now. I don't necessarily trust Flackett to 1v9 on this team. Stend is not playing badly, I suppose, but he's not. I mean, you're now in the LEC now. It's hard to step up in any role, but on a team without a primary carry where you're trying to be like these game-ending teamfight engages, that's not going to be coming too easily. So yeah, this team to me, they've got a lot to work out. They're not necessarily the most connected team themselves. They did pick up the one game versus SK, but we've said a lot about SK. They're in a very similar situation to them. And next week they have, I guess BDS isn't the hardest one. GX look much more coordinated than Karmine Corp, who we've already talked about as being quite good. So yeah, I think we're in quite an interesting situation between SK, Heretics, and then take your pick of Vitality and Rogue in terms of who's going out. Because, I mean, first, you assume it's SK, but there's one other team. So Heretics have got to give me some reason to not think that they will be, worse than Rogue and Vitality. And I don't really see who's carrying this team. I don't love the way that they have approached, like, mid-game objective setups and stuff like that. They were very panicked around objectives, which is not a good sign, because at least if you're a group of plucky rookies, maybe you can just throw caution to the wind and just play, like, very aggressive games and just go for these Hail Mary engages and whatever and not necessarily care about the consequences because there's no expectations on you or something like that. The fact that they were panicked and they kind of threw away some decent game states, they had that one good early game they had in one of their other games too. Versus, I'm trying to remember if it's versus Fnatic they had a decent early game, or was it, no, Rogue. They probably should have won their game versus Rogue and they threw that around objectives. That's the one. And if you're throwing versus Rogue like that, doesn't really speak well for your mentality and for your kind of real clutch decision making. So yeah, for me, this is another team like SK, a lot of similar issues. They haven't got an identity. So I mean, GiantX last year, not a great team, forged a coherent identity. We're on the same page. Even if it's the only thing you can do with that roster, it's still fine. Everyone knows their place within that team and they managed to do something more with it. So this team, they got to find something quick or they're going out very quickly from Winter for me.
I'll even use this team to contrast, like I said, where because people would just soar out on Karmine Corp. Even when they made those changes for summer, people were like, whatever, these aren't good names. Like, mate, I would kill for a Kammer on this fucking team or Closer or something. Give me a break. Like, the problem, as you say, Sheo and Flackett are competent players, sometimes top half players, but they're facilitators. They're not stars. They're not carries. So I think you're in a tough spot. You're in a fucking tough spot there. And unfortunately, I just don't know the coaching stuff, so I can't say I can bank on that angle. Right, let's do BDS. Because here's the thing, I'll pick up exactly where I just left there. One of the main reasons I will hype this team, and I believe they will be a good team, and they'll be like maybe the 4th team or something, they can potentially contest for a playoff deep finish or a world spot or something, is I do put a lot of faith in Striker's coaching. I think if you just look at his work he's done, the RLs, especially with BDS, I thought that was a masterclass what he did these last 2 years. Remember, he got 2 completely different ADCs and just made it work. Like, one doesn't talk in his career and can seemingly only play champions where you just move around the map for him. The other one wanted to run the whole game and was the hyper carry and did all the... I think it's amazing how he handled Adam. Look, I'll give you that. He maybe made a mistake on that Winter one, but he was trying to... that's one of those examples there, Nymaera, where I actually think for real, he was like gambling on, again, a home run. What he was trying to do was, I just want to fix this problem forever, because if I can, this guy could actually be a really good player. But if I let this fester, and he's seen to have control of the team because Crownie's gone now, then it's going to get out of control, it's going to be worse. Even though it didn't work, and it ended up costing him, I get why he did it. I sort of respect the balls to do it, even if I don't think anyone else would. So I look at this squad, I think there's a little bit of the same quality of last year's team, which is they're not the most inspired set of players on paper, but I could see a world where this team could be well coached and they could actually play well together. I think Irrelevant's the steal of the offseason. I think it's a fucking banger player. Ice is really good. Everyone, if you don't know, by the way, behind the scenes, every player thinks this guy's good. Like, no one thinks he's fucking nobody. He is a good player. Nuke is good. He's just not. He's just not a fucking. He's not caps. He doesn't have caps hands. You know what I mean? He clearly, though, within his game, he can play. Put it this way, he's a top half mid. There you go. I think that's polite to say. He's a top half mid, and if you put him on his champions, he will carry some games. He'll have some good games. So, and then lastly, it's just the detail. Because people don't know the Paris guy. The Paris guy also was very heavily scouted by people. People wanted this guy.
Win an Nymaera Masters.
So to me, I think this is actually a sleeper roster, mate. It looks good to me.
Yeah, and I think even 113, I'm not going to say is, God's next greatest.
He's one of Striker's old guys, though, from Karmine,
And he's done a lot better than he in the first week than the last time we saw him in the LEC.
Absolutely.
Well. This is another guy that's on his second chance. The way that I used to categorize 113 was that in his early clears, this guy would almost always die in an invade. Like, always. He'd just, randomly go in, wouldn't have lane priority, and he'd get caught out in the enemy jungle and he'd die. But eventually he'd just come online and be a very good skirmisher and team fighter. And he was very talented at that. It's why he was one of the better Viegos of the era, of that kind of time. And he was doing very well within LFL when he was playing against people like Sheo and Yike. I mean, that's a pretty good crop of talent, actually, looking back to that.
Yeah, it was.
2022 or whatever it was, maybe 21, I guess it was, or 22, whatever. Yeah, so I think he's calmed down a lot in the early game, and he's been a lot more consistent with that, and he still had some decent angles for engages as well. So yeah, I mean, there are building blocks here. Now, if I were to... I don't know whether they've still got the hallmarks of the old BDS. I don't think they're as coherent as... Well, I suppose you've changed a lot of players. You're not likely going to, but... The old BDS were very much on the same page. They turn very quickly when an engage comes through. They'd know where to get into position at the right point. Even if the decision wasn't necessarily, quote-unquote, the right one, they'd do the wrong decision in the right way, which is always more important within League of Legends. And yeah, you have two very consistent carries in Nuke and Ice. I think that, putting Ice on something like the Misfortune, maybe not what I want to see. I think EU's not been doing great with that pick right now. Although I suppose in the Vitality game, I actually had more issues with them trying to just throw something at a crazy teleport early game and throwing a bunch of kills after a good early game had already come through. Because Irrelevant had that one teleport bot lane. They couldn't quite finish off 2 kills. They give up a load of gold and Irrelevant falls out of the game. Yeah, I think BDS have got a decent... They will... For me, they are still quite firmly in mid-table. And I don't really think they're going above that, especially until I've seen Irrelevant win a best of 5 in the LEC. He's still not done that in his whole career somehow. Look, I love Irrelevant. I think this guy has great laning. I think his understanding of side lanes is one of the best amongst EU top laners, and his team fighting can be absolutely fantastic on stuff like Cassante and what have you. I need to see that this team can pull together, and especially for Irrelevant, this guy's got to get the monkey off his back for the best of 5s. I did like their G2 composition. Last time I checked in on Paris, he was very much like a Nautilus Thresh guy back on Istanbul Wildcats when he was playing from... That was TCL's first split in Nymaera Masters, and that was a super stacked roster. There's an AD carry called Bao, which I was quite surprised didn't make it into LEC, actually. That guy was very, very hyped. But he went back to TCL, I think, this split. But Paris was very, very good on his hook champions and quite bad on enchanters. For him to pull out the Seraphine versus G2, and for it to be a game-changing pick, where actually G2 did not have the staying power to get through Seraphine heals and shields, that was pretty huge. And I think, who was in the interview after that? I think it was Nuke who was calling out Paris saying, yo, this pick was super smurf and it really worked for our draft. And obviously G2 didn't know what to deal with it. I don't know how many enchanters they played against there. There's the makings of some good stuff. They're fairly organized when it comes to those team fights. I don't expect them to be mega, but I mean, yes, if you can kind of get them to a similar state of coordination as the last roster, they'll be decent.
I also think if you are Striker, you've actually got kind of like an underrated amount of tools to work with. Like, think about it. You've got some good solo laners that we already know are good. They're proven. Like, you've got your old jungler. So this is the guy that you knew how to work with in the past when he was like a less developed player. You've got actually what looks like it's going to be a good bot lane. And I even think, depending on how the meta goes, the beauty of Irrelevant and Ice is they're both players that can carry and be the weak side. Like, you can just sort of, you actually, if you're like the...
That's true, actually, yeah.
It's like, look, I'll give you this. They don't really have like the one player that can like hard carry the game. They don't have the Jackies type player, but they certainly have like potentially a good floor. And like I say, I'll put it on the coaches. I think you've got the pieces. I think you've got some of the pieces you wanted, and I think you can cook. Go to town.
Yeah, and especially when you're already showing stuff like the Seraphine as well, always worth noting that for stuff like Fearless Draft. We'll see how it comes up with that. When we get closer to Fearless, we'll have obviously a few more games of each team to kind of justify on that one. I don't always like to kind of say, well, coaches are going to have huge amounts of stuff to work with because the players have to really buy into that system too. And I think that actually BDS were quite, I don't know what, I was about to say they were quite lucky with that with the last one, but actually given the amount of times they have to bench people and change people around, maybe they weren't so lucky with people buying into that system. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy with the individual level on here. If I compare them to mid to bottom table teams, I think that they probably have better player player kind of value than most of like the bottom to mid table teams. So yeah, they should be able to work with that.
Right, the last team, I saved them till now, is of all the teams with the rookies, look, it is the Mac and Pad special. They're supposed to be the fucking rookie whisperers who can come in and get people up. They're going to have to, though, because I'll tell you what, mate, I don't really get what I don't get what this roster's about. And I especially don't get why Yellasang is still here. I know that you want to do what I said earlier, but if we reclaim him, though, I'll wait until I see that happen. Once I see it happen, I'll believe you. But until then, that's not a player I'm going to believe in. I'm sorry. So I have no idea. I think Kazi's still good. The mid lane, I guess, had that game that looked good to start with. I don't know what to make of this team. The Linchas guy, by the way, it was hyped to the heavens last year. I haven't seen that yet in his LEC performances. I want to know what you think of this team. I think it's really hard to judge, personally.
Well, funnily enough, Stend was Linces' support when they were both in NLC at the same time, so that was a weird kind of like blast from the past too. I was willing to give this team and this kind of roster benefit of the doubt for, bits of last season and whatever, because again, I think one of the other takes I had on this show back then was this is a very good case study to show what can you do with a team that is pulling in multiple directions with Hylissang on one way and Vito on the other from a coaching staff perspective. If you can make this work as a coach, you gain a lot of respect for me because of X, Y, Z. Obviously, that didn't work. Vitality as an organization, well, let's have a think about all of the players that they've had come through their roster without really achieving much for them. Photon, he was great. Vito, he was MVP at some point. And yes, I know he was limited in some parts of his gameplay, but still has an upper level. Bo, you've had Perks, you've had Selfmade, you've had Alfari, you've had a bunch of
Upsets. You've had some fucking bangers, mate. You've had all LEC talent, basically.
Vitality as an organization may have been the biggest squanderer of LEC talent that I can remember.
Yes.
And that's really sad to see because Vitality have been around in Europe for a long time.
And they've spent a lot of money as well, mate. I've heard they've spent a lot, especially on like Perks. They've spent fucking millions, mate.
And they spent these, especially in 2022. Vitality B was also spending a ton of money.
Yeah.
They had 2 League of Legends.
Yeah, if people don't know, that was when they had like Selfmade was on the fucking academy squad. And by the way, he had a huge contract too because by the way, Selfmade also on Vitality. They've had all these players,
And I think even when Perks kind of like left that roster, I think there was one of the splits after, or maybe it was one just before.
I believe they were still paying him when he was in Heretics, mate.
There was a point where Vitality B, I think, cost more than the Vitality main roster for one split years ago.
Okay.
I can't remember what roster they had in LEC, so it might have been more reasonable because they had like because Vitality B when they had.
It might be when they had did Alfari play there? I don't know if he went down to the academy.
I can't remember. I can't remember all of the. Look, Vitality B has had a lot of different players go through their roster too. Vitality has really tried to accrue a lot of different players and kind of pedigree their way out of different ways. I don't know how they've managed to squander that much talent because they had.
Yes.
They had one regular season, a 23 Winter, where they managed to finish first with a 7-C record. And that was when they had Neon and Kaiser as their bot lane. Yeah. But this team now has, like, not even great for LEC standard player level. I mean, Chayak I didn't have much expectation of. Naka was more well-regarded than LEC. I think Chayak's actually done quite well, considering I didn't expect anything.
Yeah, of course.
His Taliyah game, his first one, was nuts. So, yeah, credit to him for outperforming at that level. But this team has still not got the name brand value that they had before, and they still look quite disconnected, and you're still dealing with this problem of what the hell do you do with Hylissang? I mean, I cast their second game or third. Yeah, one of them. And partway through that game, when Hylissang's working his way up to whatever 10 deaths it was, I was saying it on the cast, but just in general, who the hell on the Rift is holding Hylissang back? Who is putting the hand on his shoulder and saying, buddy, this isn't the play? Because it was quite clear that he wasn't achieving, even when Mickey on G2 was dying last year, he was doing it for an important ward, which would then win them a fight after. I can at least give some props for that, even though I'm like, maybe...
And he could hit and then make one good play late or something, Hylissang will just run it down.
Yeah. I mean, Hilly did have one good game against BDS in late game. Even the early game was pretty tragic from that. But his late game Alistar against BDS was good. But I wonder whether Hylissang has maybe been empowered too much at this point, because I don't know if there's anyone on the Rift who is saying you cannot make this play, you shouldn't make this play. I understand undermining a player if that's the way they see the game is not going to be helpful. But how long does this last, realistically? Yes. And also to a certain level, too. Hylissang is in the short running for greatest LEC support ever. I think it's him, Mickey, Yellowstar, and Mythy, right? Probably. Yeah. There's probably one or two others in there. But how much is he actually tarnishing his own reputation at this point? Because this has been... How many years has it been since he's genuinely been top tier? 22, he was excellent. Fantastic. Short running for MVP, especially in spring. And then 23 and 24, I think, have been massive steps down from that. It's been... And it's really sad because, I mean, anyone who's watched peak Hylissang loves the hell out of this guy. He's scared, and when you listen to the coaches and players of that era from Korea, the Western player they hated playing the most was Hylissang, because he just did random stuff that would really, really throw you off your guard. And in fact, when Sven changed to support, when he went over to NA and he changed over to support, the way he trained doing support was every time Hylissang based, he would pause the game, he would pause the video and say, where do I think he's going to go on the map? And you'd see if he was right, and most of the time he was wrong. And then you'd have to think, well, what the hell is Hylissang doing, and what can you achieve with that, and why? The way I referred to it is kind of like Picasso. Picasso, obviously, impressionist. If you look at his artwork, you think, okay, well, this is not fine art or something. Picasso knew how to do fine art. He knew how to do all of the greatest portraits and whatever. And because he knew the rules, he knew then how to break them. But you have to have that base point of knowing the rules to then break them in the appropriate way to have the impact that you want them to do. Hylissang used to be like that, where he wouldn't reset in the correct way. He would stay a little bit longer. He'd use an ignite to stop someone's recall, so he'd have a slight timing window somewhere else on the map, something like that. He really was thinking in those processes. But now it just seems like he's going for these massively A to Z plays with none of the steps in between really linking up, and it doesn't seem like anyone's on the right page with him. And now the problem is, you can't wait for a roster that will be on the same page as him now. You have the roster that you've had, and you've had the rosters which you've had for the last couple of years, and it's quite clearly not working out to it. And if it does take a top-tier roster to understand his vision of the game, I don't think he's earned the right to be on a top roster for the last 2 years now. So it's really sad to see that. Obviously, I want to see the best out of him, but someone has to just get on Hylissang's level and say, well, okay, these plays are not working. You cannot be throwing away good early games. They even got given an easy first blood by Mickey in that one game they played against Fnatic, and that didn't work out. So yeah, I'm really quite worried for the decline of Hilly's career even further, because Kazi's playing bloody well.
He's still good. He's still really good. And
I think Nako in that one game where he was again just turbo sprinting it, played really well on weak side to just say like he was playing out the 1v1s and 1v2s before the very fed bot lane would come into his lane and ruin everything to find something out of it. So I feel a little bit bad for Chayak and Nako, because it feels like now that potential promising start to their career is being overshadowed by Hilly kind of taking things into his own hands in the bot lane.
The problem you have from all the interviews and chats I've had over the years about Hylissang is I actually feel like essentially what used to be the prescribed wisdom is now what's fucking you, which is everyone tells you. By the way, he is the most night and day player between what people who aren't in his team think of him and what everyone else thinks of him. It's crazy. Like in the splits where he is running it down, the amount of true believers he has in his team is crazy, bro. They will go to the ends of the earth to let this guy in. It's fucking bonkers. And part of the problem is, it's because their theory is actually that the way you get the best out of Hylissang is to unleash him. And it's more like the idea, and by the way, I'm sorry, when he was a genius in Fnatic, I could almost believe this. Now I definitely don't believe it. The theory before was he's always seeing something you're not seeing. So just trust him. And, it's like a trust fall. Just go with him. Just go with it. Just go in when he goes in and it'll work out somehow. The problem with that is, even when Kazi was at his peak last year, that could still be ints. That could still be some outrageous ints that just will lose the whole game immediately. And even sometimes when you're winning the game, he'll still go for that player. So I actually do think, if anything, the whole, to be the Hylissang Whisperer is just let him be free and let him be this wild Mustang. Well, in this analogy, he's got a broken leg or something, mate. It's not working. You can't be a bucking Bronco anymore. But unfortunately, I'm with you. If you're going to tell Hylissang, rein it in a bit, it's like, why have you got Hylissang at that point in time? You know what I mean? You might as well get something else.
And actually rehabilitating his image now would take so much, because maybe he could sit down and do a freaking lecture on why he was thinking what he was thinking at different points, but there are so many moments where it's clear that no one is even close to viewing how he's seeing the game, that I don't know how you rehabilitate it.
Put it this way, it's one thing if it's we're umming and ahhing about do we go for this dragon, and then he goes in and you follow him up. I'm talking about he's doing the moves where the other guy would have to be on Kaiser and fly across 2 screens to get in the fight. Some of these, it's Hylissang, no one could have followed this up. It's impossible, mate.
And it is really tragic, because alongside that too, a lot of people obviously known him for a very long time. They believed in his gameplay for a very long time. I've hung out with him a couple of times, and I've talked to him personally, and the people who have done he's a very
well-liked player, yes.
He's a very well-liked person and a very well-liked plaer. So for it to get to this point where we're like, buddy, what are you doing? It actually has gone against a lot of goodwill.
Yeah.
So and his last chance for any other player would have been, especially when we talk about how harsh the LEC has been on rookies, has been pretty extensive over history, and my problem is now is I don't know how this is going to affect players like Shayak and Nako, and maybe even Linsis as well, in terms of what could have been quite promising starts to their careers. Are we seeing kind of the diverging paths of history, because sadly they're kind of on a slumping team on a macro and strategic sense.
And then I'll just say, as one last aspect on the Hylissang thing, the other problem is this: they always tell me you need the right sort of jungler to work with. You had this guy last split. How can you in good faith tell me that, then go to the off-season and just re-sign up for the same thing again? I'm with you. I do think you need a very specific type of jungler to work with Hylissang. My problem is this: I don't know that it's the Lyncher Sky, mate. If I'm looking I'm thinking fuck, maybe that's where Jankos comes. You know what I mean? I need someone where, surely someone has to temper the madness. You know what I mean? It can't just be we're all looted. I can't, put it this way, if anyone ever put Malrang with this guy, the world may as well just end, mate.
It'd
be off the wood.
Oh, that would have been so entertaining. God, I remember the first time when Cloud9 changed their roster away from High to it was an Incarnation back then to Jensen. I remember a point that you made, because this was really big at that point. You said there would have been a beauty in the original Cloud9 roster sticking together, just because it was a beautiful way to play the game, even though High wasn't the best laner. There was something to said about, look, it is cool to see someone just stick to an identity, even though they might have found their ceiling. There was something to that. I would have seen just an absolute... I would have been there for that absolute chaos roster, just for the pure entertainment value.